to get this show on the road. So welcome everybody to session 160. My goodness, 160 of Millennia and Microcosm. This is continuing the fourth chapter, chapter 8 in the medieval civilization section. And we made great progress last week. We got through paragraphs 1, 2, and most of 3. We're going to pick up partway through 3 this week. And 1, 2, and 3 of chapter 8 are the part where Kenneth summarizes the ancient. This whole chapter is about theology. The medieval interpretation of what divine theology is like and how heaven and hell works. And as is his wont in this book, he's trying to do comparison and contrast so that we understand these different worldviews in relationship to each other. So his first 3 paragraphs, he focuses on a recapitulation and expansion of what did theology mean to the ancient Greeks. And starting with paragraph 4, which we're going to get to in a few minutes, he then starts into how different is the medieval interpretation of God and the nature between God and man and so forth. It's good stuff. And I see Sharon has her hand up, so come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Well, I just wanted to give a tribute of gratitude to you and on the entire group, because over this 160 weeks, I've learned quite a little bit of philosophy, and I ran into a book that says how philosophy works. It's a comic book, and I am going through it. It goes from the very beginning. Right now, I'm into continental philosophy. And the magic about that book is in this 160 weeks, a lot of the stuff, it's there and it's explained. And I am really having a good time. I'm going to show my brilliance in another couple of weeks.
Yay! So remind us the name of this comic.
But how philosophy works, I'll just grab it and show it to you. Right? It's I ran to it in the library. It's just graphic, and I called it a comic. I'll show it to you.
Okay.
It's very, very good.
Fantastic. I'm always looking for things like that. I have most of the I have all of the volumes of the comic guide to the universe, the cartoon guide to the universe, and I have a lot of that author's other, the cartoon guide to this and the cartoon guide to that. He does things on electricity and physics and DNA and you name it. It's very difficult for people to write things like that. They have to really boil things down and figure out how you can show it visually instead of talking about it. So I have great admiration.
That's what it is. And philosophy for me is very dense and very circular. And the way my mind works, I have a mind that likes to get to the point, the action point very quickly. Well, you can see it, I get to the point. And so what do we do with this now? Where do we
Yes, exactly.
Go from here? And so I philosophy, because they're so circular. So a graphic representation with the main points have been very, very helpful. And it's been amplified by the discussion of the past 160 weeks.
Nice.
All right. So I'm going to get the book and I'll hold it up and I'll show it to you. Thank you for allowing me to say that.
Thanks for mentioning it. We'll chase it down, find ourselves a copy of it.
Well, there's one here called How Philosophy Works, the concepts visually explained.
DK. Published by DK. Their Big Ideas series of books. That must be the one.
It's a blue book, right?
Well, this one has a purplish cover with a load of images on it. Concepts visually explained.
I think that's the Audible, Stephen. The book itself looks blue, if I'm looking at the right one.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'll go get myself a copy. We'll follow along after Sharon on this.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that as you're reading it, you're finding that what Kenneth has walked us through so far in the first 8 chapters of Millennia Microcosm is this is kind of one of the points we make from time to time when we have a lot of new folks on the call. Because Kenneth is not trying to teach a specific system of interpreting the world. He's not a guru. He doesn't want you to latch onto him and become one of his disciples. He's a philosophy professor. And so he writes in a way that's constantly pointing us to other writers and other philosophers. Oh, yes. Nice. other writers, other philosophers. So it should be the case.
Phenomenology.
Just about any Kenneth Smith book you pick up, you should come out the other side with, you know, sort of like a philosophy undergraduate degree. It's, you know, it's whatever it's ostensibly about. It's also about who are all the philosophers and what do they think, and you know, he's trying to do what this book is doing. So I'll get a copy. Thank you. I'll get a copy. I see Donald has his hand up too. Donald, tell us what's on your mind.
Oh, I got triggered by Sharon. Somewhere in Hegel, 50-something years ago, he has where he says, you know, philosophy is inherently circular. The philosopher begins where he is, in the world, in his own time, and begins making sense of things. But ultimately, he must make sense of the history that gave rise to himself and to the origins of the philosophy that he is promulgating. It can't be any valid system of thought must be able to explain its own origins, how it came to be. And you think, oh well, that's so silly. But how many times do you watch a movie or read a book, and in the end you say, how could anybody have known this? They're all dead, or something like that. You know, there's no way for it to actually have become. And so Sharon, yes, it made my head hurt for a long time. I had this linear view that we should be able, like Descartes, to find some premise that we could start from and only go forward and never have to go backward and never tie the ends together to make a complete system. Because if it's not that, then it's incomplete. It's left something out. The philosopher is left out how his own philosophy came to be. You know, so anyway, I just think the way you described it as circular was, I had these same thoughts. It's just I was younger,
Well,
and it was Hegel that sort of helped. And to think that Hegel could help straighten anyone's thinking out just also is.
So you're asking for a phenomenon to fit itself to you. You've gone all Immanuel Kant.
Oh,
you believe
no.
that you look at this complex thing called philosophy and human thought, and you expect it to sort of fit in easily with you.
No, I wouldn't say easily, but the point is, you know, it has to have an origin story.
Yes, yes. That's the first part of the book, Foundations. And here's another thing that I learned, to my delight and surprise, because I see myself as a pragmatist. And there were pragmatic philosophers. And he spent 4 pages on it. And I was absolutely delighted. I said, so I'm not dreaming, right? So it's been a fascinating, this is like a double and triple read for me. And I'm going through it.
Yes.
You know? So, and these discussions are provide such amplification, you know, as I hear Donald talk. Phil is not here today. And even though it was confusing to me, I listen and I pick up some stuff from it. Because I'm a total novice, but I'm getting better.
Well, thank you, Sharon.
Thank you. So why don't we dive back in? I guess we'll finish off paragraph 3 first. I'll start with the sentence 5, which is where we left off last time, just for continuity, to make sure we we see where we were. Hang on a second, I got to relocate. There we are. My computer is getting too complicated. I need to simplify it. my philosophy, it's becoming Ouroboros and eating its own tail. As Aristotle's rhetoric advises its readers of the interplay between politics and psychology, as Aesop's fables give accounts of the wiles and guile of human nature and its correlative follies, so the myths, the Greek myths, treat the rules of rhetorical interpretation between men and gods. How should we expect our nature-driven acts and illusions to impact the various gods? And why do they seek to shape our judgment so subtly? So this is going right to what Sharon and Donald were both talking about, which is Aristotle's basically saying it's not enough in rhetoric, it's not enough to teach people how to be persuasive. And likewise, religion, the Greek religion is not enough for it to just try to tell us who are the gods and what are we supposed to do. But their entire approach is about including questioning the approach itself. Why do we think this way? Why do we imagine the gods are like this? What is it about us that contaminates our ability to perceive the sacred and interpret it the way it actually is? Why should we feel certain that we have a grasp on the gods and can dictate terms to them and tell them what they are? Which is what we're doing when we insist that other people are wrong about the gods and that only we're right. We're saying that we've got a monopoly on perfect interpretation of the sacred. And that shows a lack of philosophical awareness. Philosophical awareness requires us to question our knowledge. You know, how is our knowledge contaminated by our expectations and our desires, our ideologies? How is it contaminated by our ignorance, the things we've never experienced? And so we don't know how to interpret them correctly. It's never happened to us before. Why should we think that the divine is such a tiny realm that it fits comfortably within the narrow experience of a single human life, and our ability to interpret it? Why wouldn't the sacred be bigger than that and contain all kinds of things that we struggle to understand because our point of view is too mortal, too finite? All of this is just built into the ancient interpretation of religion and the sacred. This concept, yeah, Athena runs away because she's like, oh God, here comes all the talking. So, you know, why would we expect that the same finite restrictions that hem us in as mortals would hem in the gods? Why would we expect the infinite to fit comfortably within a finite mind? This is key and, you know, part and parcel of the ancient perspective. And we're going to find that the medievals don't agree. And they say, on the one hand, yes, God is infinite and mysterious and blah, blah, blah. But on the other hand, I'm going to tell you exactly what God wants you to do, and I want you to shut up and do it because I know. Because that's how simple. Our mysterious, infinite God is so simple that I know exactly what he wants, and you should listen to me. There's a contradiction. And we're definitely not talking a paradox here. It's just a direct contradiction between the two parts of what becomes the basis of the medieval power structure. And the ancient worldview has as little tolerance as possible for that kind of certainty. For a finite being to feel that certain about the infinite is contemptuous. It's hubris. So this is where we left off at the end of last time. So why don't we dig into the sentences to come and finish off paragraph 3. It is for the sake of the natural resolutions of story, the logic of mythos, in which pregnant meanings play themselves out as potentials aiming at their actualization or fulfillment. So here we have a classic Kenneth sentence. He's capturing the ideas of phusis, becoming. Nothing is just what it is. It's also the fruit of its past selves, the seed of its future selves. It contains within it its own character, which contains its laws of transformation and unfolding. And it is in the process of trying not just to exist, but to change, to become that new thing that its character drives it to become. And that this naturally, if this is the normal pattern that nature follows in all things at all scales of organization, then story is natural to nature, because teleology, transformation over time in a direction, is a story. That an oak becomes an acorn is a story. That, that the fertilized egg goes through embryogenesis to develop all that sophistication and become a newborn infant. That is a story. All stories are based on the processes of transformation. And part of what they're trying to illustrate is, why did it unfold the way that it did and not some other way? Why didn't the oak grow up to be a daisy? I mean, why didn't the acorn grow up to be a daisy? Why an acorn? That is to say, a critical part of storytelling in the ancient Greek idea is this Dionysian sacred drama of the theater, this idea that the world inside us is just as huge and vast and important and lawful as the world around us, the nature around us and the nature within us. And with the nature around us, at least we can see it and hear it and smell it and touch it and taste it and try to figure out what's going on. But with the nature inside us, it's invisible. It's every bit as important to our lives, but it's invisible, which paints us into an impossible position. We can't live our lives effectively unless we understand these two natures, but one of them is hidden from us. And so it is the purpose of the god Dionysus, partner of Apollo. It's the purpose of Dionysus to explore the hidden world within us, the invisible world, to make the invisible visible, to take character out of the invisible recesses of the human heart and place it upon the stage in the form of human beings walking back and forth and uttering their silent, unconscious lines out loud, verbally, where we can consciously hear them and reflect on, is that why Agamemnon did what he did? Is that why Oedipus did what he did? Oh my God, these are the reasons why this story unfolded. I can see the lawfulness of character. I can hear it in the dialogue and then see it at work in the actions that happen. I can make the connection between the lawfulness of character and the unfolding of the story. This is what the god Dionysus, because of the Greco-Roman merging of Dionysus and Bacchus, we teach Dionysus as the god of drunkards. He's that wine god. He's all about being drunk. And it completely misses the point for the Greeks. I mean, yeah, to the Romans, sure, Bacchus, let's go get drunk. But Dionysus was a deeper god than that. He was just as important as Apollo. His name, Dionysus, Dio, Theos, means God. And Nisus is new, like newborn. New, the new god. The Greeks, he was Dionysus because it was foretold that, generations of gods replace each other. The Olympians had already placed the Titans. The Titans had replaced older, more chthonic gods. And someday the Olympians would be replaced. It was part and parcel of the Olympian religion that it was temporary. Someday new gods would take the place of Zeus and Hera and the rest. And Dionysus was ostensibly one of the new gods. It's right there in his name. And so Dionysus is not just the god of lying around drunk. This wasn't what the Greeks saw as the future, of the improvement, the upgrade in religious sensibility. They said the upgrade is that Dionysus can turn the invisible visible and make us not be self-blind, make us a philosophically astute civilization that can learn to be introspective and to take the hard-won wisdom of figuring out who they are and what is trying to unfold in them, what story is trying to be told. And they could take that into account and make a better civilization. I mean, there's some deep stuff at work here. And all of this is implied when he's talking about story, when he's talking about mythos, he's talking about the pregnant meanings, the unfolding of new order. All of this is this nexus that's about character, which is what the Oracle at Delphi is about. I mean, sure, to people who have no idea what the Greeks are talking about, the Oracle at Delphi is the fortune teller who gives you the answer at the end of the book. You go there and drop some gold and he tells you if you're going to win the war. That's certainly what the Persian emperor thought, which is why he was completely fooled and defeated when he invaded Greece, even though the Oracle warned him, if Persia invades Greece, a great empire will fall. He couldn't hear what was going on because he didn't understand the extent to which the Oracle was not going to be fortune telling. It was going to tell him about himself and his character. He was the ruler of an empire, and he was hoist on his own petard through his own self-blindness. All right, so far so good. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
new civilization, what the Greeks thought about a new civilization. I get that with some of the, the modern philosophers in the last few centuries might have had that concept, but did the Greeks have that concept?
Yes. Yeah, the Greeks, part of the reason why people sometimes say that the Greeks invented history, which is not technically true, but they certainly were obsessed with it, is, and as a discipline, is that they were very conscious of the fact that they grew out of an older civilization that had screwed up badly. They were very curious about why things had gone wrong and wanted to know what they could do to avoid going wrong in that same way. So they're thinking historically, and thinking historically means thinking about birth and about mortality and about succession over generations. This was on their mind. And this is why you see what's so weird about their religion is it's not the fact that it's not just polytheistic, but it's successional. And it's not successional in an oblivious way, like they never even noticed their gods have been replaced. Even their later myths talk about the succession of gods. What is the relationship of the Olympians to the Titans? What is the relationship of the Titans to their forebears, and so forth? And so it shouldn't surprise us as much as it does, and yet it still surprises me, even though I know it, that they would, in their pantheon, include the successor to Zeus, Dionysus, the new god. He's gonna change the religion, just as the Homeric Olympian project had already changed the Greek religion, by welding together the tribal gods into an Olympic pantheon.
I'm thinking for the Greeks, I've always sort of had this impression that they were a primitive people. They got in their little boats and they sailed over to the Levant and Egypt, and they were probably shocked at the stuff they had, the technology, even the ideas. I feel that what we think of as Greek philosophy probably had its roots in the Levant. But it came as a shock to the Greeks.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, oh, man, look at all this stuff. And then they started to talk about it. So I don't see the Greeks as being the absolute inventors of philosophy. I see them as receiving ideas from this sophisticated Middle East, Assyrian Empire and all that.
Yes.
And what they did do was improve on it. It's like the art of making statues. They seem to have acquired that from the Middle East.
Yes.
But then, by about the time of the death of Pericles, they've gone way past anything that they were doing in the Middle East in the way of statues.
Yes.
And actually, it's stuff that we can't really surpass today.
Yes, it's astonishing the level of realism that they attain. It's staggering.
This wasn't achieved, just idly working with bits of stone. This is blood, sweat, and tears that created these marvels. We think of the Greeks in an idyllic sort of way, but these guys must have been really toughing it each day to come up with the stuff they did.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, anybody who's worked with stone, and everybody's at least picked up stone, right? And messed with it a little. Anybody who's ever worked with stone can, you look at one of those hyper realistic marble statues and your jaw drops. Like, how do you do that? I mean, how this, you look at the Stone Age Venus figures, and as amazing as they are, you can still at least imagine somebody working that over a period of weeks. But you look at one of these ancient Greek statues, you're like, did you spend years? How did you even survive while you just sat there obsessively rubbing on this rock and chiseling on this rock? How, the level of obsession required to achieve that level of excellence is conspicuous, right? It's, so yeah. I like to think of it like the way that Americans think about the Japanese. At first, we were condescending after World War II towards the Japanese. Oh, look at these industrious little people. It's nice they're taking an interest in our things. But by the 70s, we were starting to get uncomfortable. So they're like, their things are getting better and better, and then pretty soon they're making these rotary engines, and they're getting better gas mileage, and we're like, God damn it, we don't want you to beat us at our own game. That's not okay. This is, we have an uncomfortable feeling. I think what you're saying, you can imagine the Egyptians and the people of the Levant looking at the Greeks, shaking their heads, going, "These people are a problem. They're just." I recognize our ideas, but they're messing with them. The hell.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that, whether they were looking at the Greeks and thinking, what are they up to?
Yes.
Well, I certainly would have wondered about Alexander, I suppose.
Yes.
Realm.
Yes, absolutely.
This idea of the new world to come, did the Greeks conceive of a new civilization to surpass their own?
Yeah, yeah.
I have to see that in writing.
Yeah, it's
thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Some things like this, the longer you wrestle with the Greeks, the more arrows you find in their work that's pointing in this direction. It's never as clear as them coming out and giving a manifesto saying, this is what we believe in and this is what we're about. But it's like history and archaeology and anthropology and these other non-laboratory sciences. Their claim to science is, it's not that we can always reproduce this on demand to prove that it's true or give you a simple equation. But what we can say is there's a preponderance of evidence. The more evidence you look at, the more you keep finding arrows pointing in this direction, until eventually you start to conclude it cannot be an accident that Aristotle will not shut up about Sophrosyne. It just can't, right? This is clearly important to him. Even though he never comes out and says clearly, exactly what's on his mind. He's always hovering around this nexus of excellence and vitality and, the pursuit. So it's the same with the Greeks. Kenneth says in other places that there is a kind of weird self-awareness to the Greeks. The fact that they're critical of their own history and their own heroes on the one hand, I mean, sometimes they're adoring, but frequently they write non-complimentary things about their heroes and their ancestors in ways that just seem very un-American, if that makes sense. It's like, how can you be so negative? And you see it doubled down when you read, Thucydides' history of the Peloponnesian War, or if you read Xenophanes saying Socrates could have easily saved himself in his trial, but he chose not to. He knew what to say, and he wouldn't do it. They didn't kill him. He was not a victim in the sense that moderns want to believe. We want to think that he was chained up and held and, they stabbed him. We want to think a Roman execution or American execution. We don't want to think, I knew exactly what I needed to say. And it wouldn't have been a big deal to say it, except, I wanted to make a point. I wanted to make several points at the same time. And one of them was about some things are more important than our own survival. And so I'm going to give up my survival as a rhetorical ploy to make a point that will last for thousands of years. It's curious. It's curious that level of criticism of their own culture, that sense of we are not living up to our best ideals. We know what those ideals are. We know it's possible to live up to them. Some of us have in the past, at least partially. And we expect ourselves to rise to that level, which is above where we are now. And if we're not going to do it, then we're not going to be around long. Kenneth sometimes describes the Greeks as being like a meteor, and that they were a candle lit at both ends. They knew they weren't going to be around long, and that's why they so obsessively wrote everything down and argued about it. They're trying to document the lessons. They're like anthropologists who, instead of coming from civilized London to the backwoods of New Guinea and are writing about, the New Guinea folks saying, look at this weird primitive curiosity I found. It was like they were writing about London itself, saying, look at this weird curiosity that we live in. I mean, it'll be gone soon. If we don't write it down, nobody's going to know this ever happened. And he says, Kenneth says, this is how the Greeks write. They write like it's a diary being written during the Holocaust, right? This needs to be recorded for posterity because and this is part of why Kenneth loves to quote the Paul Valéry essay about the mortality of civilizations. It's like the Greeks are saying, we know that not only are we individually mortal, our civilization and everything we hope for is also mortal. And we strongly suspect our days are pretty closely numbered. So we got to get our final words out while there's still a shot, because after that, God knows what'll happen. So anyway, yeah. So this idea from sentence 6 is this idea of the nexus, between character and the way that the lawful nature of character makes you change over time and unfold new order from within yourself. And that creates a journey as an organism. To be an organism is to be on a journey. Even though a pebble's on a journey, it's not quite as obvious, but you can't watch a frog egg become a tadpole, become a frog, without figuring out there is an arrow at work here. There's a direction. This is a journey. There's order unfolding, and it makes a story. And that therefore stories are the right way to talk about the world. They're the way that makes sense to us. It resonates deeply within us when we encounter a legitimate story. We go, oh yeah, I know this all the way down in my bones, all the way down to my DNA. I sympathize with this process of transformation over time. I can learn this way. My evolution, billions of years of evolution have prepared me to understand what you're saying when it's in story form. So they said, so it's natural that, and when he says it's a story, he's also saying that the Greek gods change and the nature of the sacred changes, because that's what happens in stories. Stories are about change. We're not talking about timeless, eternal truths. We're talking about contingent, historically contingent truths that are part of a metamorphosis over time. This is going to be incredibly important in a few sentences. So from here, that's the end of is it the end of no, I jumped ahead accidentally. Pardon me. Okay, so from this was the last sentence, I guess. Sentence 5 is where the heck am I? I'm getting myself lost. Sentence 6. I think sentence 6 is the end of paragraph 3. So there are a couple of things to talk about here. One of them is storytelling, myth. And this is a reminder that when we were talking through chapter 4, one of Kenneth's implications is that the proper role of an aristos in a society is not just what we think of as governance or politics, being in charge. That's like, in some ways, saying that is the shallowest, most misleading way to interpret the purpose of an aristos. But instead, it's religion and storytelling, that whole realm of mythos in which truth can be, even difficult, obscure, but important truths can be rendered in a form that anybody can understand, a story form in which the invisible is made visible, the intangible is made tangible, the hidden, Heraclitus's hidden harmony, the thread of cause and effect that connects things together, can be exposed in a way that even the least educated peasant can hear the story and go, ooh, I do not want to be Oedipus. I'd better pay attention unless I want myself to end up that way. And that shaping these mythoi is incredibly difficult. It's easy to make a cheap saccharine imitation that has the outward form. You could be like Virgil and be a master of language and make something that has all of the surface structure of an epic. It hits all the beats of an epic. It's as long as an epic. It took mastery to create, and yet it doesn't have the heart of an epic, because instead of being a warning about our existential condition, about the very most important things to understand in life, it's just a celebration of how great it is to be Roman. Woo! Look at us! We're from the survivors of Troy. Woo! We've overcome obstacles. We're the best. And you know, Americans could mistake that for an epic. We love triumph. But an ancient Greek would never mistake that for an epic. What has gone wrong? What are we prone to get wrong that we have to keep in mind? Epics are supposed to be like the warning stories that alcoholics tell one another that says, don't pick up the fucking bottle. What is the most important thing in your life that's going to wreck you if you don't figure it out? The epic has to deal with that. And if it does everything else but doesn't deal with that, then it's missing the soul. So this is what I mean. These are hard to write. You have to be willing to confront difficult truths in yourself, let alone in your civilization. And that's what Aristoi are for. That's why they pit the experiential part of their mind, like, you know, that's concrete but parochial, against the abstract intellectualizing, systematizing part of their mind, which can speak more broadly but is in error, as Hegel warns us. Tendency to gloss over things that matter. It's when they critique each other that we finally put ourselves in a position where we're able to ask the hard questions and, as Socrates says, do justice to the rights of that question. And only then can we be sure that the thing that we want to call an epic is worthy of being called an epic, that it really has the deep survival value that can act as a generator for a civilization. And this is what Aristoi are for, according to the ancient Greeks. It's to be religious in this profoundest sense, and to shape stories that can help create epiphanies for mortals, to give us a chance to liberate ourselves from our ideologies and appetites, to see the consequences of our ideas and behavior in story form, in a subjective, and this is the critical part for Kenneth, in a subjective, value-charged form that is moving and unforgettable. So people will reflect on it over time and gradually grow a little wiser, or at least a little less foolish. It's not to be objective, not to be value neutral. It's not to say here is something useful in the sense of anybody can pick it up and use it and they don't have to change who they are as a person. The whole purpose of these deep stories is to change who you are as a person. As Kenneth says, every other subject gives you something new to think about. Only philosophy gives you something new to think with. And it does that by questioning the things that we've taken for granted. This is what Aristoi are for, according to the ancient Greeks. This religious function that he's alluding to in sentence 6 goes right to the heart of why the Greeks believe Aristoi exist. Not to eliminate mystery, but to spotlight mystery, the mysteries of life, and show why they matter, and get people to care about them, to make caring about the mysteries of life part of the character of the people of that culture. And with that in mind, I'm going to share one of Kenneth's parables. It's parable number 100, the last parable in his book Otherwise. And it's called Mistress Mysterium. And I'm just gonna drop the text into the chat, and then we'll read through it. It's one of my favorites of his. I think it was the right one to end his first big book of parables. So paste, 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 paste. And 3 more paragraphs to go. There's 1. Here's 2. And here's 3. Okay. Reading time. Mistress Mysterium. The Sphinx that dwarfs a man is herself dwarfed by the infinite desert, for it is of the infinite that the Sphinx is meant to be a reminder. By her scale, she refers us to another order. As man keeps cats, so the Sphinx keeps mysteries, herding them unseen from man's banal concerns. The Sphinx is the sacred animal of the sleepless, deathless gods, whom she fascinates through the long night of eternity with her brood of enigmas and its exotic variety. The Sphinx incubates a question, the very most mortal question, the heart-stopping question that kills one's most vital illusion. Out of perfect oblivion is precipitated the unthinkable thought that is delirium and death, for every mind is master only over some of its thoughts. One of its thoughts is master over it, the knot that holds the reins of all the others. The master thought cannot be thought because no mind can rise to encompass it, except by the ingenious weave of the Sphinx's question. The master thought for the mind subject to it is a truth too true to be thinkable. But once it has been made thinkable, it can be seen to be a myth, a profound and powerful lie, which held the mind in an authoritative untruth or systemic self-delusion. Only the sardonic gods, in whose veins flows ichor, not blood, and whose thoughts are not mortal thoughts, could bear to have the Sphinx as their intimate pet. Some have said that the eggs the Sphinx incubates are truly skulls, heads that have spent their intelligence. But who would have learned such a thing? For every species, there is a specific toxin or repellent, a bane. Man-bane is some form of myth-killing mystery that leaves in shambles a way of life, a strategy of order, a civilization. Man lives always in mystery to himself, oblivious to an infinity of whys, and never suspects it. He's such easy prey to tempt onto the path of self-disillusionment and self-obliteration. The gods say that their Sphinx does not even understand what a challenge would be. Whatever she hunts already has the mark of doom upon it. Thousands of lives ago, men formed cities as citadels against the consuming infinity of mysteries. These men would huddle and reassure one another and take measures against the resurgence, the epidemic of chaos. But by the time this thought occurs to them, their orders have gone. How can anyone know in what form mystery may present itself, like a cancer eating away in secret at the bones of human order? Could it be in the form of apathy or criminality? Could it be the asphyxiating dementias of corruption or hypocrisy, or the narcosis of entertainment? Could it be the dimness and dullness of a cultural atmosphere, the spent air of a closed chamber? Don't all finite realities already lie in the belly of the infinite, which is the certainty that they can be otherwise? The Sphinx kills by degrees, by strangulation. It is in honor of her name that we have sphincter and asphyxiate in our language. So this is core to the paragraphs 1 through 3. That's why I wanted to finish up paragraphs 1 through 3 with this quote of Kenneth, because he's just spent his focus here trying to get us to get into the spirit of the classical concept of God and theology and religion and the afterlife. I mean, it's like chapter 4 itself. It's a little. These 3 paragraphs are a little miracle of Smithian concentration. He's giving us philosophy and history concentrate here. And the whole purpose of this is to set up our ability to go forward into the medieval concepts of God and theology, starting with paragraph 4. So before we go on, any last questions or concerns about Kenneth's kind of summary of classical religion, or at least the spirit of classical religion as he sees it for purposes of this comparison? No? Well, then, Stephen.
If I could understand it, yeah. I could better understand what he was on about.
I was writing a post for Facebook about butterflies, and one of the things I did was I was talking about how nature loves to produce specialists. And if you've ever watched a David Attenborough nature documentary, you know that part of what he does is he just rocks you back on your heels over and over and over, with animals and plants doing the craziest things. If you're sitting down to write a fictional story and you were trying to be creative, you never would have come up with half of this stuff. Like, how did this organism ever evolve to behave in this batshit crazy way? And this is Attenborough's whole point of, like, his whole life is about showing that nature is just relentlessly inventive of these surprises. In fact, it's half the point, right? These organisms are trying to surprise their predators and their prey. They want to do what's not expected. And they don't just want to, they really need to come up with life strategies that are going to make the other organisms all drop their jaws and just stare. Because that's the opportunity to either get away or to pounce, right? Depending on whether you're predator or prey. So it's almost the signature of Mother Nature that there are mysteries and surprises and paradoxes. If the thing doesn't contain mysteries and surprises and paradoxes, it probably isn't real. Anybody who goes through med school, you come out with just a laundry list of crazy things about the human body and how it works. You're like, who would have designed it this way? And the answer is, well, it wasn't designed. This is nature doing its crazy thing and saying, we had a certain amount of variation. Most of the like Stephen likes to say, most of the acorns fell on ground that isn't going to work. But it means this kind of scattering, this profligate exploration of possibilities, most of which fail, means if there is some crazy, bizarre possibility that no one would ever think of that's nearby, evolution will, at sooner or later, hit upon it just through random variation. You don't have to design it. You don't have to think of it. If it's out there, it can be found.
I say that, the idea of the acorn, because everywhere I see people who believe that they're on the road to becoming human perfection.
Yes.
When am I going? Well, on the most material level.
Yes.
When am I going to get my big car? When am I going to get my big house? It's like all these little acorns all expect to grow into oak trees.
Yes.
And really, that's not quite possible.
Right. That's not why there's so many acorns, right? It's not so that each and every one of them can be an oak.
Well, nature's built on redundancy,
And
it's making sure that something's going to get through by explosive numbers.
Right.
And then you've got to turn around and reflect on yourself and think, well, am I one of those acorns that are never going to make it?
Right. Which we don't like to think about, right? We don't like to imagine that we're the supporting character and not the main character. What if my purpose is to die at the end of the first act? God damn it! I don't want to be the chirpy underdog whose death motivates the protagonist.
I might say something further. This is something that's been on my mind for a long time. But
Can I add to what? Okay.
Oh yeah, go ahead, you.
I just wanted to add to what you're talking about right now. I find that here, living in Florida, on the same vein of what you're saying, I see these tiny 3 feet mango trees producing mangoes. It's like, I'm going to produce mango just like these, 30-foot trees that are right next to me. I don't care. I'm going to be just, it's that I see that kind of, I feel like, oh my God, good for you, little tiny mango tree.
Yes.
Yeah, that I find that amazing.
Yeah, all those acorns have aspirations, right?
Jeannie, they have a lot of dwarf trees down here. I have one in my backyard. That's why they're so tiny.
No. But no, I think these I know the neighbors. There's one particular mango tree. I think they just planted them maybe like within a year or two. And it's like, oh my God, look at that tiny mango tree with mangoes. When there are like other mango trees that are like 5, 10 times taller than that one with mangoes, And I think, well, again, I said, go, little mango tree. Anyway.
Well,
Yeah.
and this is what you and Stephen and Sharon are talking about is the perfect illustration of what the Greeks are saying. There is, granted 1,000 acorns and only one of them is going to become an oak, but they're all going to try.
Yes.
It is in their character to strive, and it means, most of them won't make it, but it also means, aside from the few that become giant, glorious mango trees, you're also going to get a lot of little fringe weirdos who are sort of barely hanging on, but they figured out some niche somewhere that nobody else has made work. And they're like, I'm not dead yet. I'm feeling better. I think I can do this. You see this in the Southwest. If you go to the Grand Canyon, you find these rock formations, and here's some damn tree coming out of it sideways, and then trying to grow up, going, there may only be half an inch of soil in here between these rocks, but by God, I'm gonna make it work. And you're watching this thing go on, and here's this tree 265 years old, and it's only 6 feet tall, sticking out of a rock. And you're like, it had to work so hard to make that work, but it was in its character to try, to strive.
Well, I talked about this in other meetings. I don't know if I had at this meeting, at your meeting, Rick. I was listening to the scientist who had been studying plants, trees for many, many years, interviewed on NPR a couple of years back, and she was talking about how an oak tree, for example, when it knows it's dying, it will send the nutrients from itself underground to its own offspring that may be 20 feet away, even though there's
Yeah.
another tree right next to it, like 5-10 feet from it.
Yes.
It's like, how does it know,
Yes.
you know, that offspring is 20 feet down further than this, you know? And I thought that was just fascinating again.
Yeah. There's a lot. I mean, this is kind of what Kenneth's getting at with his metaphor of the Sphinx, and in trying to capture the Greek idea that there is an invisible world all around us. And it doesn't require any supernaturalism to believe in. It's called the laws of nature. You know, the law of gravity is not sitting somewhere on a tablet that's authoritative over the world. It's invisible within all of us. All things everywhere are participating in the creation of this field of gravity. And the fact that it's authoritative doesn't mean that it's obvious and easy for us to explain or understand. And the Greeks are saying, you know, that's true for subtler important things as well. Like, why do we do the things we do? How much free will do we have? How much are we is our outcome predetermined? If we don't like the path we're on, what would it take to change our life? Now, these are hard questions, but they're questions that matter to us at a very visceral level. And what Kenneth and the Greeks are saying is that bonus of life, the things, not just the things you can stick in a bank or put on a shelf, but the invisible things that are driving everything, we have to learn to care about those things, right? We don't naturally care about them because we don't naturally perceive them. Something in our life is going to have to wake us up to the idea that there's all this stuff that we can't quite put our finger on, but that matters a great deal. And we have to learn to focus on those things. And so this story of the Sphinx is the story of all the parts of the world that we don't think about, that we, like Stephen says, the things that we take for granted. We assume that we're the protagonist of the story. Well, what are the odds that all 8 billion of us are the protagonist of this story? I mean, you know, it just doesn't seem likely. Maybe this isn't just a story with a protagonist, you know, but also at the same time, you know, maybe we need to learn to have a less egocentric perspective on ourselves and the world.
There's something about the Sphinx story, though. It reminds you of those stories of the nightmares where people feel they've been smothered.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, asphyxiate. There it is right there. And one of the last words he says in this. And that's how people...
Maybe this was a very common dream at that period of history.
Yes. Psychologists, if Ari was here, he would be the one talking. Hypnopompic and hypnagogic hallucinations are a very common consequence of the structure of the human mind and our relationship between being awake and asleep. Certain percentage of people will wake up at some point feeling that they are paralyzed and that some foreign presence is in the room and is strangling them or doing something to them. And, you know, this is people used to imagine that this meant they were being taken by the fairies. And in the 20th century, they think it means they're being taken by aliens. And what psychologists say is it means that the structure of the metabolism of sleep and wakefulness in the human mind, and, you know, why when we're dreaming that we're running, don't we get up physically and run? What is it that holds us down and keeps us paralyzed in our sleep? And exactly when does it let go when we wake up? These things are not 100% perfect in Homo sapiens, and it can be terrifying for people to be caught in between, where they're conscious but still paralyzed and think, you know, oh my God, I'm in trouble. This is again what the Sphinx story is sort of alluding to, is when people are confronted by these mysterious depths in which we swim, whether we know it or not, it can be terrifying. It can be very hard for them to accept the bigger picture that they're a part of. But the Greeks believed it was part of the purpose of civilization and religion to get us to understand we're part of a bigger ocean, and to get us to pay attention to what our duties and responsibilities and opportunities are within that much larger context than the one we're comfortable with. To dilate the mind, not to shrink God down to be small enough to fit inside the certainty of a pinhead, but to dilate the mind of a pinhead, to be able to conceive of other people as mattering. That, you know, anyway, Sharon, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Well, I just kind of wanted to make sure that I understood paragraph 3. And what I'm coming away with is 2 things. continual evolutional magnitude of the sacred, because he talked about that. And the second thing is there's a process of natural selection which impacts animals, plants, and humans. We don't like it, but it does. So not every acorn will grow into a big tree. Not every human being will come out to be successful. Some of us get left behind. And for us, it's opportunity and effort. For the acorn, it has to do with soil and weather and circumstances in the forest. It's just a huge process of natural selection.
That's right. That's right. And the philosophical / anthropological / Smithian / Greek take is that because we are the animal more than any other animals that is dependent upon culture to finish us, that we are born an unfinished animal, and we're lacking all the instincts that a butterfly has. The caterpillar knows what to eat and what not to eat to survive. The monarch caterpillar knows to eat the poisonous plant so that it will taste. It doesn't know why. It doesn't know that it's so that it will taste bad so that the birds stay away from it. It doesn't know the reason, but it knows that if it feels that if it pursues its desire, its instinctive desire, this is the right way forward. And it's correct, because those instincts and that biology, that capacity to metabolize the cardiac glycosides, the digoxin of the that's in the milkweed, will allow the species to survive. That's been whittled away at, that combination of biology and behavior, for millions of years to create a winning combination. And the problem for Homo sapiens is we're not born with a winning combination. We're born as a very curious, ravenously curious, generic animal that can't even hold its head up. And it's up to the culture to finish and turn this abstract, adaptable animal into a concrete, specific animal. Maybe it's a fisherman, maybe it's a reindeer herder, maybe it's an anesthesiologist, but it's got to become somebody to succeed. And an enormous amount about what's in us is that aching hunger to become and to belong. And that gives us certain opportunities, and it gives us certain vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and that's one of the points that I focus on poverty. That aching hunger.
Yes.
When you're poor, doesn't get to be nurtured.
Yes.
It's not a matter of being loved. It is a matter of being loved, because some poor people get loved, but it's a matter of not having your own dignity or ever being respected.
That's right.
And so that aching hunger goes away. And that also is part of that aching hunger doesn't exist. And that also is a process of natural selection.
That's right. That's right.
But could I just add, I'm sorry, Joe. I just wanted to ask it, because that was going to be my question, Sharon, is based on what you just said, Rick, that the individual's evolution depends on society's cultural attention to it. So what happens to those that society sort of kicks to the curb?
Yes.
And does not continue to try to lift them up and move them? What happens then? They just sort of fall by the wayside, or have to find it some other way, or what?
Or never find it.
Or never know exactly where to look or how to find, or if they found it and don't even know.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an interesting phenomenon, I think.
You're asking the critical question, because it exposes both the strength of Stephen's metaphor and the weakness. And the strength is all the things we've been talking about. And the weakness is that we're not oaks. We don't produce thousands of offspring per individual. That's just not our strategy. There are plenty of animals that do. They just generate just unbelievable numbers of young. And sometimes the adults even eat some of the young, because there's so many of them. It's like, they're like potato chips. It doesn't, there's no real investment in them. But Homo sapiens is not that animal. We are incredibly expensive at producing one offspring. And we have not just biologically, but culturally evolved to the point where it takes decades 25, did they say, before the human brain starts to not be insane? You know, before you start to be it starts to calm down through the process of apoptosis and growth and transformation. You start to become a real person. And that, to get to those 25 years, requires grandparents. It requires language. It requires baby teeth, so that the long, slow developing child is able to be separated from its mother so she can reproduce again while the rest of the family feeds the child its sort of semi-food that it's capable of with its baby teeth. There's all these stages of development that happen in Homo sapiens that only make sense if we see the offspring as being a high investment, rare creation, not scattering acorns to the wild. And the problem is, and this is something that people don't often explore in depth, that doesn't come in a vacuum. If the offspring is rare, evolution will have designed the offspring to have certain hungers and desires that go hand in hand with being rare. That need to complete yourself, that need to fill yourself with culture, is also a need to do something, to accomplish something, to contribute something. You're driven, right? There's a drive in you to act. That's because you might be the only kid. If you don't act, we're screwed. You can't be like an acorn that you hit the rock, you're like, oh well, fuck it. This is like a bunch of acorns with massive egos, because they need to make something good happen. So if you thwart the young and you deny them any opportunity to be a whole human being and contribute to the world, they're not just going to passively accept that. They're going to act out. They're going to become revolutionaries. They're going to become terrorists. They're going to become criminals. They're going to become something, because the drive to become in a creature with rare offspring is very high. It's very strong. And now we get to the concept of health, the way the Greeks conceive of it. The health of the group does not get to supersede the health of the individual. And the health of the individual does not get to supersede the health of the group. To be healthy in the Greek conception means both are being met at the same time. Because an organism is made up of other organisms, and it itself, together with other organisms, makes up larger organisms. If any of this breaks down, we all suffer. People can't live without their civilizations, but civilizations can't live without their members. So if it is in the nature of a civilization to wreck its members and discard them as though they're acorns when they're not, that civilization is not long for this world for a variety of reasons. It is committing suicide, whether it knows it or not. Sharon.
But haven't we seen it in the French Revolution?
We do.
There's a bunch of angry, discarded people. So the point I was going to make, 2 points, is that when any society acquires a critical mass of discontented, discarded people,
yes,
then people act.
Yes.
And we've seen it time and time again in history.
Yes.
And I want to say the second thing is the process of natural selection starts very early. In my lifetime, I've been in so many delivery rooms, and these new human beings come out, and some of them are not going to survive.
Yeah.
Because they weren't designed to survive.
Yeah.
Right? And it's, so why does the genotypes and the phenotypes go awry? We don't know, but they did.
Yes.
And it's part of the natural selection too. So I think if I were to give it an overview, I'd say it's a process of natural selection. And when you discard people, society eventually pays.
Yes. It's natural selection for sure, but it's natural selection combined with nature's urge to diversify. No species is clones of one another. And that was what we used to think in the 19th century when evolution was new, is that each species is sort of designed and has a little recipe and they're all like this. But what we've learned in the century and a half since then is it's just not true. That nature is relentlessly producing variations on a theme. And these variations, a lot of them won't work, but a lot of them will sort of work. And that sort of working is every bit as important as the ones that really, really, really work. In some sense, they might even be more important. because the ones that really, really, really work and thrive right now are only thriving right now. When conditions change, the ones that are thriving right now are going to fail. And it's those weird variations on the edges. Somewhere in there might be someone who's got the right gift for whatever the weird new condition is that we change to. That stupid tree that's 250 years old hanging on to a half-inch of dirt sticking out of a rock at the Grand Canyon, right now, it's not able to thrive, but it is surviving. And should the earth experience terrible drought conditions, most of the other trees that scoff at it now for its puny six foot height that it's able to pull off might be wishing that they could survive under those horrible conditions that this thing thrives in. The earth could be populated by these little trees sticking out of rocks, hanging on to little tiny bits of soil. The amount of change that can happen in our ecosystem over time, we now know, is staggeringly high. We know about the early lava Earth, they used to call the Hadean epoch or era of geological formation, although it turns out that might have been a lot shorter than we thought it was. But a lot of people don't know about Snowball Earth. About Snowball Earth? It's like after, the early atmosphere didn't have any oxygen in it. All the oxygen it oxidized with iron in the Earth's crust, and so we had a lot of red rocks, but no oxygen in the air. And it was the development of single-celled organisms that metabolized by producing oxygen as a poisonous waste product that generated our oxygen atmosphere. They would go about their chemical business, and as a side effect, they'd end up with this poisonous oxygen that would kill them. And so they'd excrete it from their little cell body, and the oxygen would float away in the atmosphere, and the little organism was safe from its waste product. The problem is when the entire planet is covered with these organisms, they produce oxygen at such an intense level that they oxygenate the atmosphere and poison themselves. These are today's anaerobic bacteria. Anyone who studies biology learns about anaerobic bacteria that can't tolerate the presence of oxygen. Oxygen, if you study chemistry, is a radical element. Hello, fire, rust. Oxygen just wants to chemically react with things. If you're trying to build yourself a cell, the last thing in the world you want is free oxygen in there going, whoo, baby, look at all these great building blocks. I'm going to tear them out of your cell wall, tear them out of your DNA, and make new molecules. So an enormous part of what goes on in the human body has to do with managing oxygen to keep free radical oxygen the hell away from the structure of your body. We're constantly trying to scour free oxygen away and not let it run free and bind it up safely into molecules to make it behave itself. Because otherwise we die. So life on Earth started with things that couldn't handle an oxygen atmosphere. And accidentally, as a byproduct, they generated an oxygen atmosphere that poisoned themselves. They terraformed the planet to become something new. And at that point, the weirdo misfits on the edges of that biology that had a gift for processing oxygen, which was pretty stupid and useless for the first 1.5 billion years, suddenly their day had come. Woohoo! We know what to do with this stuff. And so the anaerobic bacteria had to retreat into mud pits and other obscure places within the crust. And it was the oxygen metabolizers that took over the Earth and spread across the entire planet. And ever since, that's been the dominant biology on Earth. You with me so far? It's one of the biggest transformations in the history of life on Earth. We terraformed the planet. That sky is blue because of life. That didn't just happen. Well, more people know this than know the part I'm going to say next. The part I'm going to say next is even more interesting. You know how carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas? The more CO2 you have, the warmer the air gets, right? Well, the converse is true for oxygen. It's an anti-greenhouse gas. If you get lots and lots of oxygen in the air, you don't retain heat very well. But Earth is a weird, uncomfortable balancing act between nitrogen, CO2, water vapor, and oxygen. And that balancing act did not just happen to happen. This isn't just random chance. So all over the planet, you've got this new generation of life forms that is able to handle oxygen environments, and they're generating oxygen left and right, and they're using it in their cells to generate energy and metabolize their food. And everything's going great, except at some point the tipping point happens when there's too much oxygen in the air. And two things happen. One thing that happens is fires start breaking out all over the fucking planet. There's an era of fire Fire is too much fire. But the other thing that happens is the planet, which you wouldn't expect to go hand in hand with fire, the planet abruptly gets cold. Just about the whole planet froze over. Maybe not around the equators, but it made our ice ages look like nothing. And we're talking billions of years ago. And I think the last one ended around 750 million years ago, something like that. There's a cryogenian period in Earth's history, and they can tell everything was frozen over and icy except for narrow bands around the equator. But when the last one relented, that was when the rise of multicellular life happened. The Precambrian explosion, the Ediacaran era with the weird animals, jellyfish, sponges, all the things that exploded out in every direction. They came in the aftermath of the last snowball Earth. And the last snowball Earth was kicked off by the fact that CO2 metabolism, the generation of CO2 as a waste product by plants, became widespread. Things that were not just comfortable with oxygen, but would generate CO2 that raised the CO2 levels in the atmosphere and created enough of a greenhouse effect to end the snowball Earth and make more of the planet habitable and warm to allow a diversity of life. So on the one hand, you've got things generating oxygen. On the other hand, you've got things generating CO2, and they're in a balance with each other, trying to terraform the atmosphere to say, on the one hand, we don't want to get a runaway Venus effect, and on the other hand, we don't want to go back to being a snowball Earth. All of this stuff is going on. This is in climatology, it's in paleontology, it's in geology. All these sciences, as you study them, you get a lot of arrows and they start to point to these really complicated pictures in which these dialectics turn out to be the basis of life on Earth. And many of the dialectics were created by life itself along the way. It's just astonishing. There's these deep mysteries that we're part of. This deep profundity of time and these deep cause and effect relationships. We're dependent on things we don't understand. And the more we can learn what our genuine needs are and what makes it possible for us to be here, the greater the chances that we can make this a going concern and not wreck everything. So I don't remember how I got onto this off of the original discussion of, we're not oaks. We don't produce thousands of offspring every year per individual human, but there was some connection or another.
Natural selection.
So that's it. Natural selection. Oh, because conditions change, and they can change more than we can imagine, and the way we know that is they already have.
Darwin proved it.
Yes. And when geologists found the evidence of snowball Earth, their jaws all dropped. Nobody had imagined. I mean, an ice age is one thing, but a snowball planet? What the hell? When they discovered the evidence for that, everybody had to go rewrite their books. It's like, evidently, life is just weird. Joe, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking about this from a couple of different perspectives. And I think the last point you just made about the idea of the conditions changing, it's interesting because when we're talking about this natural selection aspect of things, and even what does it really mean to grow into be an oak tree? And that's where I'm a little bit unclear on that. And I was wondering if you could clear that up before I maybe address, because when I think of it in these terms, the way I've been hearing it, I've heard it in different perspectives, and I'm thinking about it in terms of, you were talking about stories earlier, and the idea of how stories, they communicate universals. And so that the idea that we all can't grow into an oak tree, I understand that, and I understand that there's an element of natural selection, but it looks like that we're kind of talking about this in two different ways. We're talking about it in the sense of that there's the one way, which is, we're just talking about resources, fundamental resources, and on different, varying degrees. But then we're talking about universals, which are actually something that allow us to enable us to all live our lives and to thrive. And the reason I bring that up is that I do think that there's this other form of selection too, that everybody's growing to be an oak tree. But then it is relative over time. What does it mean to have resources? What types of resources are you going to have? So when you're pushing up, your reference points change. And when your reference points change, it's just like, well, it's here, now it's here, now it's here, and you're always going to need more. And what I see is what is being communicated with the idea of the gods and the stories themselves is that what is actually fundamentally true? What is, the stories communicate universal truths. And that to me is like where even the way we're kind of using the word, the ideas along the lines of I don't know, the way we're thinking about natural selection, we're only thinking about it in terms like of again, more of a resource allocation and not enough of things that transcend those things. And so, and I think that those are two different things that need to be highlighted. It's as if there was a professor that had come down from actually Yale. He was a Case Schiller, Robert Schiller, and he was talking about this idea of irrational exuberance in a book he had just written way back in 2001. And and he was talking, and he said, I think it was almost every year he would ask, his students, how many of you are going to be millionaires? And he says it's an amazing number, a percentage of them that say yes, that they're all going to be, millionaire. And this is, and he says, well, I guess that's true if inflation's out of control, but he says it's certainly not true if everything, holds the way it is. And, the idea then, my point being is that you have this idea of resources and, then what does it really mean to survive? And what does it really mean to live? And I think that sometimes conflating those two is problematic. And I think that that's what kind of Kenneth is talking about when he talks about this idea of metaphor or using stories, because they're communicating something much deeper that is unseen, as you had talked about, the things that are not so obvious that enable us to thrive. And, this comes back to this, the Aristotelian approach to the poetics. A story has to be universal, has to span across cultures, and has to, kind of resonate. And the reason that is that it's something that scales. And it's something that scales, it's something that's accessible. And I think it's just, we think of terms, and again, natural selection, I'm not denying that the idea of resources and the limited resources, depending on as long as you don't maybe that Malthusian scarcity perspective. But there is an element here that I think what it means to grow an oak, to be an oak tree, is not necessarily always just relegated to having a house or a car. And I think that it's important to disambiguate those two. That there's that separation needs to be known, because the truth is, as you get more and more, like anything else, you have that hedonic treadmill. Your reference points change. That means it's not a universal. Because if it's a universal, you would be like, oh, I'm here, I'm doing this, I'm living well. But it's like, no, I'm living well, but I need to live better. And then this other perspective kind of comes in. It's the idea of, then we were talking about how, if you hold people down, that there's inevitably goes horribly wrong. And that is true. So then I think that the other aspect of it is that, well, what does it really mean to then thrive? Is it to actually enable more oaks to exist, or is it to continue to try and grow higher and higher, if you will? It's just using it metaphorically. Anyway, I think that that's just an important thing to be able to separate when we're talking about what it really means to be, even when we're talking about natural selection. Because I think that part of natural selection, this whole idea, is that humanity in general has had enough people that have pursued the right thing in order for us to be here.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd not be here. I mean, and so that's part of the natural. So that's the natural selection of the whole. You know, and I've had this kind of conversation a lot. Recently, somebody said this, asked a very interesting question. They said, if you could have if you could have your daughter cured of cancer, if you and were to release an artificial intelligence that would actually be an existential risk to humanity, and that my thought was that there have been enough people to answer no to that question over time in order for us to all be here. So when we're thinking about natural selection, it's not to only think about it in terms of the particular. It's not to only think about it in terms of materiality. It's also to think about it in terms of the universals that enable us to still be here and to still exist as an organism itself.
Right.
That's my thought. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe.
So, Rick, before you answer that, I want to share my comic book because it talked about that. And it said, they're talking about pragmatism here. It says, like the pragmatist C.S. Peirce before him, John Dewey was influenced by the ideas of Charles Darwin, who argued that human beings have evolved through a process of natural selection in the same way as other species. The next point is the important thing. In the same sense, John Dewey was a naturalist. He believed that our ability to reason, you're talking about something else, Joe, is bound up with our instinct for survival, that we think in order to solve practical problems rather than to speculate about metaphysical issues. So you're talking about the other thing, right? The other thing comes up to us. There's natural selection and us, and it's our capacity. That's the way I'm reading that. And I think that's what you're alluding to, Joe. So correct me if I'm wrong. Because
No, I mean, I think that is in a sense that what I am alluding to. It's it is the other thing.
So he also was influenced by Hegel, who argued that all human activities, including science, art, and philosophy, are shaped by history, so they can only be understood in their particular historical context. So my interpretation of that is that this is a very complex process. Yes. And natural selection is inclusive of other things, even though they're not identified.
Yes.
So tell me if my comic is right, Rick.
I think it's right. No, I mean, and what I think that ultimately we're saying is that there are some fundamental principles that's the way I view it, that enable us to survive and thrive. So from that perspective, like, I think it's when we get caught up in the particulars and only looking at the particulars, that's where the problem then arises. Yes. And I think sometimes we do our analysis like that. Now it's like in the sense that all the time, actually, we look at things just as we were a moment ago. What does it really mean? Well, we're not going to all grow into be an oak. Well, yes, and I agree with that to some degree, but there is, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. It's not oak, no oak. and so that's where I was talking about it from the more of the universals, the principles, and the principles that enable you to then thrive. So that's the so I agree with you to a certain extent that the idea that there is these fundamental principles, but I think that the point that I was really kind of getting at is that, and even Hegel talks about this, is that One of the things about, in particular, kind of like these, when we look at philosophers in particular, that are answering a particular issue from a particular perspective. The problem with that is that it's not necessarily something that is universal. It's about a particular, a Socratic dialogue is about something at a particular moment in time. It's not necessarily communicating one of those universals that transcend everything else. And that's where Hegel becomes much more abstract.
Mm-hmm.
And
well,
unfortunately, I mean,
they put a big word on this. They call it instrumentalism. I don't know if you can comment on that, Rick. Right? So you have the process, then you have the instrumentals. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. I'm sorry, Rick.
Well, it's tricky because, I mean, the book is trying to give you the history of how these thinkers came up with their ideas.
Yes.
And what it's not trying to do is critique where are the problems in their ideas. It's just trying to get you an orientation to the history. So the ancient Greek perspective would be that there is a problem in these 19th century thinkers' ideas. And the problem is that was peak modernism. Europe was beating the whole world and was very proud of itself. And it was trying to account for why it's the best. And so built in, and they were also still halfway steeped in the medieval concept that all of this is happening because it's part of God's plan. So there's some genocidal and what do I want to say, ethnocentric assumptions built into these philosophies that the philosophers themselves have a very hard time questioning because they're at the peak flourishing period of the modern epoch. That's the period of lowest philosophical insight. It was probably worse 50 years earlier. We're starting to see critics, but we haven't hit Nietzsche yet. Nietzsche is one of the first serious hard blows against modernity, who says, okay, we're taking too much for granted. We're making too many assumptions. So one of the ways that the Greeks would critique instrumentalism, the way that it's presented by the 19th century philosophers, is to say, the assumption is that all of this is working. But that assumption is being made by straight white cis men in Europe who are not Africans dragged off in shackles as slaves. And they're not indigenous people being exterminated by smallpox. They're not Chinese people being fed opium to turn them into addicts who'll give all their money to Great Britain. I mean, there's these ways in which we're looking at the center of privilege. And it's not a coincidence that its philosophy is self-congratulatory. This must be what evolution wanted. This must be what God wanted. God must have wanted us to evolve to the point of being us. How good could it get? Whereas the Greeks have a very different take, which is funny because the Greeks were also they were pretty successful for their time, but they had a certain level of pessimism that's kind of missing from the 19th century, and that's healthy. And the healthy pessimism doesn't take the form of we're doomed, but it takes the form of self-criticism. And specifically, I know we think we're the best thing since sliced bread, but don't our ideals suggest that we behave better than we're actually behaving? When we look at our actual behavior, doesn't it fall short of what we know we're supposed to be doing? And why is it that we won't live up to our higher potential? What's happening in us that's making us behave that way? And Nietzsche will later, after these instrumentalists, Nietzsche's going to write and say, after spending a lifetime studying Greek texts, it seems to him that the Greeks are saying man is a sick animal. We're different from all the other animals. Yes, we're a product of evolution, but evolution has played a strange trick on us. It has given us enormous potential at the expense of giving us enormous confusion. We have confusions no other species has. That acorn knows, to the extent that a plant can know anything, it knows it's supposed to become an oak. It wants to become an oak. It's driven to become an oak. At every fiber of its being wants to become an oak. But a baby doesn't know what the hell it wants to become. It just wants to become. It has this drive to become something. No one right thing that all human beings are supposed to become. That's our superpower. We can become different things for different habitats. We can become, if you think of the definition of species not in terms of genetics, but in terms of culture. Every other biological species has more or less a single culture each. But we're the creature that has conceivably an open-ended number of possible species that we could grow up to become. It all depends on how we're acculturated. And the forces that operate upon which cultures are at work on us and whether they make sense or not are very different from the forces that shaped us through evolution, shaped our biology. To claim, as the 19th century people do, that everything we do is blessed by evolution is to misunderstand the artificiality that evolution gave us as a gift. Whenever we start acting based on that artificiality and freedom, we are no longer acting with the blessings of nature. We can do all kinds of terrible shit that no other animal would ever do. It would have gone extinct ages ago if it did the stuff we do. But we're able to get away with it, at least in the short run, we can get away with it. And the Greeks say we must learn to be very cautious about those things. Neither the gods nor nature give us permission to do those things. We may be very, very sorry that we ever did them. But the 19th century instrumentalists at the peak triumphalism of Europe are saying, nature must have meant us to be this way. We're supposed to enslave the world. We're supposed to conquer this must be good. Because after all, if evolution exists and it's God's plan, then it must be our plan to, put shackles on that child. Must be. There is a failure of self-criticism that's happening at the peak of European triumphalism. And that's a level of nuance you can't expect an introductory book to get to. It's doing a very good job of giving you the basic structure of what people are thinking and what's happening. But for purposes of like today's discussion and the question that you asked, I have to bring that Greek perspective back in and go, yeah, the Greeks and Nietzsche would have some things to say about those people and what they were pitching, what they were proposing.
Well, it's a very basic consecutive outline.
It's a good start.
Yes.
Yeah. And we need those good starts. Without that, we have no frame of discussion, right? Nietzsche acknowledges this. He says he's only able to do this intensive criticism because these other people have already covered the ground, and that frees him up to question them. That's what makes his culture criticism possible, is that they've already done that work, so he doesn't have to.
I think really quickly, if I may.
Yeah.
I think that this is the point is that when we look at things from a utility perspective only in a particular situation, and that's where instrumentalism kind of comes in, and you start telling the story from that perspective, and you're only looking at it, and this is the way the world needs to be because this is what it means to have progress. And so then this is how the progress is actually then defined. That's really where the trick comes in. It's you're being, without knowing it, you're being turned in on yourself.
Right.
And if a species goes too far with that, you may not exist. And that's what I'm saying. On the flip side, is there's been enough people to do the opposite thus far to kind of stave that, kind of keep us going, but that's not a guarantee.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you.
Well, that's why I think everything is a spectrum, right? And you have utilitarian and then you have duty. So it kind of balances out because everything has pluses and minuses.
Sure.
And that's the evolution. Am I wrong on this? Tell me.
No, you're right. And it's also why, as Kenneth says in this text, why teaching it as a story is incredibly helpful. Because we get the idea of stages of development. So we can see how instrumentalism, practicality, is an improvement over an earlier stage of philosophy that said, it doesn't matter whether what we're doing makes any sense. We do it because otherwise I burn you at the stake. That there were limits to what we could achieve so long as it was do what I say or I punch you in the face. Getting to how about we do the thing that works represents progress from that. But then it may take a while. It may have taken 100 years before, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. And we start to say, doing what works might not be good either. because the question is, does it work in the long run, or did it just work for this quarter? So we did the practical thing, and now we're exterminating the species we depend on to survive. And we didn't see that part before. You know, the story unfolds, the new chapter unfolds, the unintended consequences of our actions unfold, and we gain the ability to learn and try to do something even better if we learn. So thank you both. But Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Well, I'm not an evolutionary biologist, but
Yet,
right now, I mean, we generally think of evolution as operating at the species level, but there are no self-sufficient species now. Or maybe there, I think there's still some like sulfur-eating bacteria or something that can live independently. But as you described earlier, it's always a common, you know, it's a, I don't know, it's, let's say a competition and cooperation between those that emit oxygen as a waste and those that emit carbon dioxide as a waste product. And even, you know, human beings, what do we eat if there are no plants? What do we eat if there aren't? I mean, Stephen, we eat babies. Yeah, you know,
Each other.
each other. Yeah. So you know, and the other thing, in terms of this complex history that you outlined, Rick, it's not surprising that we don't see new life being created today. You know, if you want to create, I mean, as a historical question, you have to go back 2.5 billion years or something to those conditions. We only have this one example with this one historical pathway that started with maybe not even single cells, but just complex molecules terraforming a planet to make it suitable for itself. And it's been remade by subsequent evolutionary terms. Well, that's all. You know, I don't know. It's too complex. But I think follows generally sort of a Hegelian scheme of subsumption of each into the previous. You know, you keep the old, you add the new, you combine them, and go on. I wish somebody else would talk now.
well, you're in luck because Phineas has his hand up. Phineas, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I was thinking about the utility, or what is it that a human's supposed to become, and that often it's very like physically based, car, house, and that was reminding me of when we were talking before about the Greek gods compared to Diogenes, like the old gods compared to the newer god, in that the original Greek gods, to my eye, they're like a great example of how to be in the physical world. For example, Apollo represents, like, I think, science and knowledge of the world. Whereas Diogenes, you were saying, which I never realized, this is super interesting, that he's more the introspective, and he's also the newer layer to these things. So I almost feel like so using those gods as a good model for how we should be physically, like what is our oak tree, is very helpful, and it's a good point for humans to have gotten to. But then the next layer of evolution, like you're getting at, is to assess like what are our actual driving forces and how do we function more internally. And then that can help us create actually like different forms beyond just what the Greek gods represented, I'm supposing.
Yeah, it's interesting the extent to which, and this is not something that that Kenneth talks about in these first three paragraphs. That in the ancient Greek religion, the world was not created for people. It's Heraclitus says the nature is, always was, and always shall be. Whereas they don't see people as always having been and always shall be, but the cosmos itself is. There's this larger scale of survival and existence that's part of their cosmology, and there's a radical. I'm partially riffing on what Stephen said in the comments. There's a transformation in value system and conception of the relationship between man, God, and nature that happens on the boundary of the medieval revolution, where we start to think people are the point. That it is about people. You can see why medievals would come to believe that the earth was the center of the universe and the sun went around it, even though there were already people in Greco-Roman times who refuted that. But the Greco-Roman version of religion has people in a contingent situation, as not necessarily. And this is hard for us to envision as human beings, but we're not necessarily the protagonists. We might be the supporting characters. There's some of the Salish tribes here in the Pacific Northwest, and I think some elsewhere, have this idea that man is the younger brother of the other animals, because they know what they're supposed to be doing. They have certainty, but they also have accurateness. they on the one hand, they proceed with their lives with what appears to be an enormous single-mindedness. But on the other hand, the things they're single-mindedly about are mostly the right things for them to be doing. And we can only envy that. Because in Homo sapiens, we've split certainty from correctness. So the vast majority of people who are certain about the meaning of life are full of shit. You should not trust them. It's like certainty is just it's the cheap coinage of thinking, is to think that you're right. Whereas conversely, if anybody ever gets it right, they get there through a process of self-questioning that leaves them absolutely not sure of themselves. It's like, maybe this is what life's about. I'm not sure. And so they struggle the other way. They're constantly being outvoted by a bunch of headstrong idiots because they want to talk with nuance about the uncertainties of life. And meanwhile, here's all these people out there with torches and pitchforks trying to absolutely drive home their stupid ideas that aren't going to work. And this problem, when Nietzsche calls us der kranke Tier, the sick animal, this is what he's talking about, is that we lack sophrosyne. Our certainty and our correctness are not married together to give us any kind of roadmap for what we're supposed to grow into. And what I think he was lacking, but that evolutionary biology supplies, that was missing, is the explanation. Why are we born without sophrosyne? And it's because there's no one right answer to the question, what is a baby human being supposed to grow up to become? There can't be. If there were, we wouldn't have evolved the way we did. The whole point of our evolution is to create that enormous flexibility, but the flexibility isn't supposed to survive into adulthood. We're a generic unfinished animal as an infant, but we're not supposed to grow up into an unfinished generic animal. We're supposed to grow up into a specific animal, but not any particular specific animal. It's up to our culture and our circumstances, which specific animal we become. What do we learn to be? What skills do we master? What arete, what excellence do we cultivate that makes it possible for us to live a bios, a way of life that's viable for the long term and that weaves us into the larger whole? Getting that to work out correctly is evidently less of a problem 300,000 years ago than it is today. But now it's a real struggle for us. It's a real struggle for us. And I guess the greatest refutation you can make of genocide, aside from the fact that it's cruel and awful, is that genocide implies that that my one true answer is the one right answer, and all people should live the way I say they should live. Whereas we just look at the biology of Homo sapiens, and it's obvious there is no one right way that we're supposed to live. Otherwise, we'd have the instincts that all the other animals have to live that one way. The whole reason we're having the argument is that evolution doesn't have one right way for us to live. So it took away the frame of all those instincts to give us all those choices that the genocidal person doesn't want us to have. This is the human condition that we struggle with. And the struggle, of course, is the point. Ari will eventually rejoin, and then we're going to talk about the way rabbis debate things and the way that religious truth doesn't come to them comfortably as a certainty. It comes to them as a struggle. You have to struggle your way through these arguments and ideas in the rabbinical tradition. And this is closer to what the human condition is. We're supposed to be achy and struggly and have these inchoate longings to become somebody, but not know who it is we're supposed to become. To want to love and be loved, but not be sure who. Somebody needs to love me, and I need to love them, but where are they? All of these urges, this restlessness, is the point. To drive this weird animal into differentiating into different cultural animals. It's a really uncomfortable but interesting trick that evolution has played on us. Donald, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Well, I just want to be pedantic with Sharon. All my history of philosophy professors said C.S. Peirce, not Pierce. That's about that, and that about exhausts my knowledge of what we covered about his philosophy was how to pronounce his name.
I don't know what he stood for, but I know how to say his name correctly.
Right. Apparently it's an English or old something. I don't know.
His name is spelled Peirce.
That's Peirce.
That's how it's spelled.
That's Peirce. That's C.S. Peirce. And I don't know why. There's some other. I don't know if it's.
I know a lot about him.
Do you?
You know a lot about him? Yeah, he lived from 1839 to 1914, and he looked at philosophical inquiry from the point of view of a scientist.
Yes. Go ahead, Joe.
No, he was a linguist as well, right? He did a lot with language.
Yes.
And a logician and a mathematician.
Yeah.
Yes.
A structuralist, right?
He's one of the most important figures in the history of logic.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, my comic did talk about that.
Yes. And the reason nobody knows who he is because Bertrand Russell threw him under a bus.
Yes.
Bertrand Russell stole his ideas and then told everybody not to read Peirce because there's nothing to see there. And the way we know that Bertrand Russell ripped off Charles Peirce is because Bertrand Russell confessed it to one of his lovers. Bertrand Russell said, I try to be a nice guy, but whenever I'm offered the opportunity to get rich and famous, I behave really quite badly. He says, I can't help myself.
Talk about that later on. They do talk about that connection later on. Amazing.
Yes. So he stole Peirce's ideas, claimed them for himself, tried to capture them in the Principia Mathematica, and made a career for himself.
Okay. Thank you.
Living off of Peirce's ideas. Yeah. Peirce he cultivated a school of logicians that included one of the first prominent women logicians who did incredible work. And one of the reasons I respect Peirce is that in all his published works, whenever he's talking about her ideas, he always says she's the one who came up with them. He doesn't once claim that because he was the teacher, therefore they're his ideas and he should get credit. And considering the time he lived in, that's really rare. You know what I mean? Men were stealing women's ideas left and right when Peirce was alive. But he says, no, she's brilliant. It's a privilege to teach her and work with her. So Peirce. I guess he was a pragmatist of a sort, but in such a way that he almost redefined what pragmatism was. You can find a lot of stuff about him. But yes, it's pronounced Peirce. And I thank you, Donald. and thank you, Sharon, for mentioning Charles Peirce, because boy, he doesn't get to come up often enough. I enjoy his work. I have piles of stuff by him I've downloaded. All right. Well, with that, why don't we dive into paragraph 4? Paragraph 4. We did the Greeks. Let's start into the medievals. This is the medieval section, after all. So, sentences 1 through 4. But the Christian God. Then this is Kenneth's way of saying, here. This is my signal. I'm turning right now. We're leaving behind the ancients. But the Christian God is not such a creature within nature. Not such a creature within nature. And before I go, well, we could finish the sentence. Conformable to its laws of characteral bias. Oh my God, that's a Kenneth sentence. You know, for those who haven't been here before on these calls, Kenneth likes his keywords. And you over time, you start to mentally make a collection of Kenneth keywords. And whenever you see the keyword, you're like, oh, Kenneth is pointing at a whole bunch of other philosophy right now. Is this sentence means more than it says. So creature as opposed to creator. This is the medieval concept of if you are the creator, then you have pure form and will and ego and design. And if you are the creature, then you have pathos. You are merely the matter and you have been shaped by your creator to be that thing. There's this concept of the absolute separation of the creator and the creature, which is very medieval. And of course, it gets played with later on. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the creature, these, what are the virtues of the creature compared to the virtues of the creator? There's all kinds of rich stuff to play with in here. And part of why this is important is because the Christian God is a transcendental God. He is an unnatural, supernatural God. He exists before nature, outside of nature, not bound by nature. He can do whatever he wants, regardless of what the laws of the universe say. He can make the laws of the universe are his playthings. This is the medieval concept. And therefore, he created all things and nothing created him. He is 100% creator and 0% creature. And that's important because to the ancient Greeks, the gods are not supernatural. This is what we talked about in paragraphs 1 through 3. The gods are not gods the way that a medieval would recognize at all. That's why they call them demons. They said these don't deserve to be called gods. And the medievals are half right. They were daimons, but whatever. The Greeks believed that Poseidon did not create the ocean, and he couldn't make the ocean do anything the ocean was not lawfully bound by its nature to be capable of doing. He is an expression of the ethos of the ocean. And he is the ruler of the ocean in the sense in which he can get the ocean to do all its stupid pet tricks. We can't get it to do anything it's impossible for an ocean to do. He is not a supernatural God. He's not a transcendent God. He's an immanental God. They believe that meaning does not come from outside the universe, gifted to us by grace from an alien God who deigns to share it with us. The ancients believe that. They believe in a meaning coming immanent within nature. Nature emanates meaning. It emanates the gods as expressions of the various kinds of authority that nature holds over things. And those gods derive their meaning from nature and are framed by it and within it. And in that context, from a medieval perspective, Poseidon seems to be as much creature as creator. And to the medievals, that's anathema. To the ancients, it makes perfect sense. But to medievals, that's anathema. That doesn't deserve to be called God.
So may I ask, Rick, then, is that why we call these Poseidon, for example, it's a Greek mythology as opposed to Greek religion?
That's our way of saying we don't believe it.
I mean, I've always,
Yes.
I mean, I remember reading this book of Greek mythology
Yes.
stories, right?
Yes.
I don't remember ever reading Greek Bible,
Yes. Well, think back another 500 years. Think back to the point when if you said, I worship Poseidon, you could be, burned at the stake. So you couldn't say, it was even dangerous to say that you were reading about ancient Greek religion. It's like, oh, religion, so you believe in it. Wait, where's my steak? somebody get the kindling. So you had to say every time you open your mouth and discuss the Greeks at all, you had to say, I don't believe in it, I don't believe in it, I don't believe in it, I don't believe it, please don't burn me. And calling it Greek mythology is your way of apologizing for taking interest in the subject. We've all inherited that in our culture it's the leftover of please don't burn me. Just because I'm interested in Poseidon doesn't mean you should kill me. I acknowledge that your God is the only true God, and this thing is just some story. That's really why we hit that over and over. But when we borrow the term mythology to use it that way, there is also a thread that we're unconscious of that goes back further that says, you know, originally to the Greeks, these were mythoi. And mythoi don't mean to the Greeks what mythology means to us. Mythoi were truths. They were profound religious stories that were designed to illuminate, to share truths that might not be obvious, but that were important. And that, you know, I'm one of those people who believes in not just the conscious connotations of language, but the unconscious, not just the conscious denotations of language, but the unconscious connotations of language as well. And I think that freights of deeper meaning of mythology is still there, whether we intend it or not, whether we're aware of it or not. And there is, you know, the Greek myths remain attempting to carry this greater burden of truth they were designed to carry, even if we can't successfully receive it because we've been conditioned not to interpret them the way that they meant. So creature creator, that's loaded terms, right? And within nature is a loaded phrase. It should take you back to Heraclitus talking about the nature around us and the nature within us. And to be part of nature, to be within nature, is to be bound by its lawfulness. It imposes rules on us, like the law of gravity, that we don't have a choice about. And in those ways, our soul is not absolutely free. We're not free to flap our arms and fly to the moon, not even if we want to. Not even if we want it really, really, really bad, no matter how many Disney cartoons tell us that, you know, all you need to do is want something and live your dream. The lawfulness of nature says that we are limited. We must suffer the laws of nature and at our best harmonize with them to find ourselves a way of life. But and this is how the ancients believed that the gods worked as well. They're greater than we are, but they are still within nature. But to the medieval mind, that's unacceptable and inconceivable. Gods must not be bound by anything, or they're not gods at all. Snorri Sturluson, yes, Stephen, exactly. He wants to share Viking mythology, but first he has to apologize. That's again his "please don't burn me." I just want to keep this knowledge from being lost. I don't really want to be burned at the stake for doing so. I promise you I'm a Christian. I promise. It was a bad time. So within nature means within lawfulness, which means suffering a pathos, suffering whatever the rules are, and you can't overcome them. And the medieval concept of God can't allow that. God has to be immune to the laws, immune to the rules, because otherwise he's not God. To be God is to be 100% form and 0% matter, 100% willfulness and design, and 0%, you know, a leash. Nobody's leashed me. Otherwise, I'm not a God. Within nature. And of course, anytime we're talking about the lawfulness of nature, we should be thinking amphibiously, the nature around us and the nature within us, that we have character, ethos, anthropoi daimon, that we have a nature that exists within us that's every bit as lawful as the nature around us. And it constrains us every bit as much as the nature around us. The lawfulness within us and the lawfulness without us are equally lawful. They're equally leashes. Phineas asked a question I'll come back to when we finish this sentence. It's a great question. Right? They're equally lawful. And so I'm not surprised, and you shouldn't be either, when he finishes his sentence by saying conformable to its laws of characteral bias. Because the nature around us has its character, which determines how things are required to work. But also the character inside us has its laws that bind us. And this is where we get to what he's about to talk about in sentences 2, 3, and 4, which is character is if character is fate, then character is a kind of restriction on the free exercise of spirit. I can say I have free will, but not compared to Geneva or Donald or Joe. They can have a drink and I can't. Right? I've got the gene. I can't do it. If I do it, I'll crawl into the bottle and that'll be the end of my life. I'm not safe. Other people are safe. Their character doesn't have this ingredient, but my character has this ingredient. I have pathos. I can't undo it. Short of genetic engineering, which God knows how far away from we are, I'm always going to suffer this part of my character as a lawfulness, an authority over me. To have somebody be, yes, leech does sound like leech, doesn't it? To have somebody know me is possible because I'm bound by my character, and they can watch the patterns of my behavior, and from that infer over time what my character must be that makes me behave that way. And as they come to know me, they come to know restrictions upon me. The only way I could be free would be to have no character, so that my behavior is 100% random, 100% unpredictable. Otherwise, I'm not free. And this is where we get at part of the paradox of the medieval conception of God, is in their effort to make him absolutely free, 100% spirit, they've created an impossibility because they want to free him from inner nature as well as outer nature. They want to say, don't you pretend that you know God. His character is ineffable. It cannot be known by the likes of you. It does not bind him the way your character binds you. He can have a character and still be free, but you can't, which is a paradox from the Greek. It's not even a paradox. It's just a direct contradiction to ancient Greek conception of character. To have a character and have it not be binding upon you means you don't have a character from the Greek perspective. But from the medieval perspective, they're stuck with the problem that they want God to be a good God. And to be good means to have a character. From the ancient perspective, it means to have the character of a good person. That's why you're good. But if you have a character, then you don't have freedom. You're trapped by your character. And they don't want God to be trapped. They want him to be good, but not to be trapped. They're stuck on their own theology. It's the game of one-upsmanship. I remember as a child having arguments with my younger brother in which I tried to fool him and outwit him by having arguments like this. And the problem is, you can pursue agency and contingency, says Joe. You can have an argument like this in which you seem to be winning, but at some point you notice that the implications of the arguments you've made so far have painted you into a corner you can't get out of. This happens all the time with the medieval God. The first 500 years of medieval theology are them arguing with each other relentlessly over the nature of God. And they're constantly trying to say, you're wrong, but I'm right. And at first it's easy because they're so different from each other. But as they start to weed out the various heresies, then the remaining heresies start to resemble the orthodoxy more and more. And they're starting to argue over finer and finer points of theology. And they also can't contradict anything they said before because they're writing it all down. So now they've got this track record. They can't just say, oh, I never said that. Their whole point is that they're a movement of writing and books and scrolls. And so you remember when we talked about the creations of the spirit get objectified and become the objective reality of houses and streets and laws. And the more of that you create, the more you become trapped in the labyrinth of your own objectified spirit until finally it's suffocating your subjective spirit. This was a week or two ago we were talking about this. This is happening to the medievals in their own theology. As their arguments accumulate, there's three of them, but there's only one of them. They're three and one at the same time. Well, that raises questions. So now you got people arguing, well, what is the nature of the relationship among the three that allows them to be one, but also three? And they start, arguing about the fine details of that. And then pretty soon, they rule out some of those possibilities, but only by committing themselves about the nature of God. And the more they commit to in writing to the nature of God, the more they're claiming to know the character of God. But if God has a character, then he has an inner lawfulness that binds him, and now he's not free spirit anymore. You see the problems. This is, later Protestants would mock the Catholics for arguing about such stupid questions as how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. This is the stereotypical summation of or rejection of scholastic philosophy from the Middle Ages, is saying that they just found themselves arguing about these inanities. But this is the natural, inevitable consequence of insisting you're absolutely right and everybody else is wrong and writing it all down. You eventually paint yourself into a corner. And it's right here in this first sentence. But the Christian God is not such a creature within nature, conformable to its laws of characteral bias. He continues, although like the Greek gods, he has his favorites among humans, as is clear from, the books of the Torah as well as from the New Testament. He stands as an absolute judge, incorruptible and unapproachable. So they're trying to say his character can't corrupt him. He can't play favorites and let you get away with something bad. If it's bad for everybody and you shouldn't do it. He likes you, but not that much. And it's the same with his hates. He might hate you, but he's still offering you salvation, so he doesn't hate you that much either. He's different in this way from the ancient gods. Who could hate you and just hate you? Or love you and just love you? He has to stand in this weird equivocal, now Phil's not here, so I'm going to say equivocal position, in which on the one hand he sort of has a character, but on the other they can't admit fully that he has a character, or else it suggests that he's bound, and they don't want him to be bound. He's radically more mysterious, more remote in principle, and you should hear the word archai from the Greeks, principle, from the world of persons and psyches, i.e. souls, i.e. character, i.e. daimons, ethos, anthropoi, daimon. All of that Kenneth is talking about when he says psyches. His subjects know of him only what can be grasped about universal principles of justice, love, and mercy. And so here he's talking about the way medieval philosophy starts to retreat into these abstract virtues. God is love. They don't want you to get too hung up on whether God is three in one and what is the nature of the relationship. That's for theologians to argue about after they go to seminary school and will burn half their scrolls anyway as heresies. But we do want you to get that God is love, because you got to attach to something. You can't attach to an abstract vacuum. You can't feel loyalty to a religion in which the God is just an amorphous abyss, desperately trying to avoid being pinned down. That's not enough to make a religion about. But they want to give you as little to pin God down as possible, to keep him as free as possible. And so they settle for justice and love and mercy and things like this. That's the compromise between the unworldly, impossible transcendence of a God that exists outside of nature versus something natural enough to love. If that makes sense. So Phineas asks in the comments, were the gods introspective or blindly acting of their nature? And I think the ancient Greeks would say yes. This is one of those questions that doesn't sound like a yes or no question, but they'd say yes. On the one hand, they varied. Some gods were more introspective than others. They held Ares in contempt, god of war who's not introspective about the evils of war and about the defects in his own character. Homer has him whining and running off the battlefield of Troy when he gets injured and whining to his mama, which is the Greek way of saying, we hate this guy. This is so different from the way that the Romans are later going to treat Mars, who they hold as the greatest of gods, who leads them to triumph over all of Italy and eventually Europe and the Mediterranean. The Greeks are like, this guy sucks. On the other hand, Athena on the battlefield is a marvel. She has all of his virtues and none of his vices. She's the goddess of excellence in battle. She's astonishing. All the great Greek warriors want to be Athena. They want to grow up to be that amazing, amazing goddess. And she's introspective by nature, unlike Ares. So, and you see this as well if you compare the Titans and the Olympians. The Titans are gods, but they are mostly not very introspective. There are exceptions like Prometheus and Metis, but wow, I mean, Okeanos and Uranus, Cronus. He's eating his kids. This is not introspective. This is what Stephen's talking about. Failing to understand the difference between you can't eat babies and you shouldn't eat babies. There he is. If I can do it, I should. It's like nobody's going to replace me. I'm just going to chow down on him. This is blindly acting according to Cronus's nature, right? And
Was Athena introspective or like thoughtful and conscientious? Because I feel like those are different things, possibly.
they are different things, but Athena and Apollo and Dionysus in particular are three divinities who are prided on their capacity to be introspective specifically. That the nature of the mind, including their own mind, is part of their domains. And so that's not possible unless you're introspective. That's part of why they're referenced over and over by philosophers as models to follow.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
I wonder if Saint John was influenced by Athena. I'm wondering. I love Saint John.
You can't say that to Saint Joan. She will be very angry with you. she
okay.
she is a devoted monotheist. She devotes herself to God. So she does not want to hear if she's. It may be true, Jenny. She might be a lot influenced, indirectly through the stories about Athena, but she doesn't want to think about that. She wants to think about being right to Jesus, doing what Jesus wants.
I used George Bernard Shaw's St. John monologue for a couple of years when I was in New York.
Oh, nice.
It helped me get jobs at public theater where, well, yeah.
That's fantastic. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I love that monologue that she had.
Yeah. So the ancient Greeks would say the answer to Phineas's question is, were the gods introspective or blindly acting of their nature? The answer is they act of their nature, and it is their nature that determines whether they're blindly acting or acting introspectively. And they make, I suspect the reason they make those distinctions among the divinities is not just because they're trying to capture the character of that part of nature and what is it like. Does it show any particular introspection when a volcano goes off, or not? If it does, then you make that divinity introspective, and if not, then you make that divinity not introspective. But the other reason is that they're trying to teach about people, and some people are more or less introspective. So the diversity of introspection we see among people, we also see among the Greek gods. I think it was last week we had the quote from Xenophanes talking about how, if horses and cows could make statues to their gods, they would make statues that looked like horses and cows. And it's perfectly natural but utterly naive to assume that the divinities look like we do, that they are like us. And it might be naive, but the Greeks did it on purpose anyway. Right? As Stephen was saying, they took those Levantine statues and they turned it into the most hyper-realistic statues of human beings they possibly could. They maximized the resemblance to human beings, and they did that as well with their characterization of them. What are they like as a character? They had to give them attributes that were recognizably Poseidon versus recognizably Hades versus recognizably Zeus. Because otherwise they couldn't arrange religious rituals around them. If any of these could morph into the other at any time and you didn't know who you were praying to, that sort of defeated the purpose of the polytheism. And so as a consequence of that, we get them acting according to their nature, which varies from divinity to divinity, and some of them are introspective and some. Yeah, Stephen says in the comments, there's no chaos in the monotheist vision either. I mean, that's fundamental to monotheism. If God is all powerful and all knowing and all good and everything proceeds according to God's plan, then there's no room for chaos. And that creates the fundamental problem for medievals, which is, well, then where does evil come from? If he's all good, then why are there parasites that burrow into little children's eyes? Is that good? And retreating into, oh, shut up. Yeah, which is what it means when you say God is ineffable and you don't get to understand him. That's basically saying, oh, shut up. Maybe somehow it is good that little parasites burrow into children's eyes and make them blind for life. But we're not going to say that because it sounds stupid on the surface. So we're just going to say it's ineffable and stop asking this question or I'll burn you at the stake. This is the problem with being, on the one hand, I absolutely know what God is like, and I'm the only one who knows. And if you don't do what I say, I'm going to kill you. And then on the other hand, we have the real world that we live in that offers us a variety of experiences, some of which are great and some of which are awful. And how do we reconcile these things to each other? And the answer is they don't reconcile well. The ultimate split at the end of the medieval era, in which the religion fragments into 1,000 varieties of Christianity, was basically set up in the very beginning by the whole premise of the medieval civilization. That is, it's like the internecine fighting that breaks out in Eastern Europe after the Soviet Union withdraws, right? You could stop those people from fighting with each other by main force, by dominating them militarily for half a century. But as soon as you pull out, the old fights come back out. And it was the same with the disagreements. You can suppress them by threatening to burn people, but you can't make them go away because they're intrinsic to what you're telling people to believe. No one who cares about these subjects can fail to notice the contradictions that are stitched right into the rapidly thrown together structure of the theology. Stephen posts, are we going to do things the honest way like Mars? I don't like you, so I stick a sword in you. Or the dishonest way like Jupiter, which is, we follow the rules because there's authority and so forth. All right, so that's the first 4 sentences. Shall we go on? We got time. Let's go on. Let's go on in this chapter. Ari's not here. Is he? Ari's here. I was hoping Ari would be. This is so important that Ari's here because
I'm here. I'm just
Kenneth's
listening.
going to talk about Judaism.
Woohoo!
Kenneth's going to talk about Judaism.
Woo!
So we gotta cast a cold skeptical eye over this and
Okay.
let us know what he's getting right and what he's getting wrong, right?
I will say, first of all, I'm definitely not an authority to say that, but I'll definitely give you my best opinion, which is going to be flawed and riddled with problems, but I will do my best.
Good, because so's his take on Judaism, right? I mean, he's a philosopher. He's not a rabbi. So his understanding of the depth of Judaism is he's gonna take his best stab at it. But
I have a feeling he's going to do a great job, actually. So we'll see.
We'll take a look. Okay, sentence 5. The Judaic tradition. Oh, he distances himself as Hans Jonas has encapsulated it. Okay, so now we're not talking about Judaism. We're talking about Hans Jonas's take on Judaism. See, kind of smart. He's stepped back from personal responsibility for what he's about to say here. First emblazoned this notion of an unaccountable divinity who might at any time require even what is unthinkable of his believers. It is for this reason that ancient Judaism sustains the disciplines of fasting and ritual obedience to rules, because no one knows what he might be divinely called upon to do. But one must be spiritually ready. And his example of this is Abraham, father of the faith, was asked to sacrifice his son Isaac, cherished beyond anything else. And so Kenneth is saying that Hans Jonas is saying that the story of Abraham is about the idea that you can't get arrogant about your theology if your God is infinite, but you're finite. You can't claim to speak for God in a way that constrains God. You can do your best to guess at what he wants from you, but you can't claim that having learned the rules, you are now the master of God, and God will always be on your side. Because he's bigger than you are. He's bigger than that. At any moment, God could ask you to do something that you didn't prepare for and that wasn't in the rule book. And to the best of your ability, you have to be open to that because he's God and you're not. And the example is, who the hell would sacrifice in Judaism, who the hell would sacrifice their own son to a god? That's something that non-Jewish religions of the Middle East were asking people to do. It was part of the selling point of Judaism that it cares about the family. We're not going to sacrifice our children to Baal, right? That was a Carthaginian thing according to the Romans. Whether it was or not, who knows? So he's saying this is the story of Abraham. So before I go on, I have to check with Ari. Is this
So far so good. So far so good.
good?
I would add something that's like, this is a nearly complete equation, that there's a humility in this, that the unified God above creates a diversified world below, and that the rules that you have, or let's say the Jews have through the Torah, is definitely not the rules that other people should have. God has his own relationship with them. And so because you don't know the nature of God, you certainly don't know the way God talks to other people. But the essential part is this idea of what's called Tselem Elohim, that we're all made in the image of God, that if you're doing so, even if you're a barbarian and doing whatever you're doing, you're still the image of God and you're doing whatever you're supposed to be doing. And it's not my place to tell you what you're supposed to be doing. It's my job to sort of interact with you and try to help you accomplish whatever you're supposed to do. But I don't really have a clue what that is. I just want us to work it out, and I want to be able to do what I'm supposed to do so you can do what you're supposed to do. And we got to find a way to have a dialectic to sort of make that work. But I am not at liberty to tell you what you're supposed to do. I'm only at liberty to tell you essentially how you're supposed to interact with me on my terms, but I don't get to interact with you. I also have to interact with you on your terms. Kind of like a, I imagine like, the Japanese and the Dutch meeting for the first time and they can't speak each other's language. There's something like, we know we're both people, but I don't really speak your language and you don't speak my language, but we're going to try and make some trade. So, but there is an element of humility that God interacts with everything differently, and I don't know what that looks like.
Yes. That is a brilliant feature of Judaism. I mean, it is one of the most astonishing things, especially for those of us raised on the medieval version of Christianity, which was, proudly genocidal. There's only one right way, and it's our way, and everybody has to follow our way. This survival within Judaism, it feels like a pre-medieval piece of the ancient value system. And what I mean is, we consider the fact that of all the reasons why Greeks and Romans killed each other and other people, and my God, they were violent, it was never over religion. It was never, how dare you have a different religion? Religious genocide was invented in Europe by the medievals. The ancients didn't have it. And they didn't have it because as polytheists, they recognize the idea that the sacred is complicated and we've only got part of the picture. And, our job is to try to learn as much about it as we can. If I meet another group and they've got another religion, oh my God, maybe they understand something I've missed and I can do better. This humility about our capacity to have the whole picture is astonishing.
If I can add one part that keeps it going, because it's like, there's also an uncertainty about ourselves. Like a nice way of putting it is like, if it's a puzzle, my puzzle is so incomplete. Why would I be worried about your puzzle?
Yes.
I've got so much to worry about. And this is the idea. Like, you keep you going. Like, dude, my puzzle's really exciting. I got lots to work on. I don't care about your puzzle, except that I know you have a puzzle, and maybe I'm supposed to help you work on it occasionally. But really, I got to work on my own puzzle.
Yes.
And because my puzzle is never going to be finished,
yes.
it would be, and my job is to work on my puzzle. It's like I don't know, say a sin. It's like it's a false belief. It's like a knowing your place. It's like, I'm really out of line when I'm working about your puzzle because that means I'm not working on my puzzle.
Yes. Yeah, it's remarkable. It's remarkable to encounter a form of monotheism that doesn't build into it religious genocide. It's not that it never happens, but certainly it's the exception. There's a natural, easy way, especially considering that human beings slip into egomania, without noticing all the time. It's a natural, easy thing to do to say, if there's only one God and I happen to worship the right one, it's a natural thing to do to say, and therefore you're wrong, and I need to make you do what I want you to do. You should also worship my God the way that I worship him. We see 1,000 years of this in Europe. This is this long, endless struggle to impose one's religious will on the other. It is a refreshing reminder to encounter monotheism that doesn't include that genocidal component and has this idea that, it is a major duty personally to me to wrestle with my faith. And that's my primary duty, not to hit you over the head and try to get you to do something. What it reminds me of is growing up as a martial artist, where the point isn't to beat the other guy. The point is that in my practice, I need to try to do better tomorrow than I did yesterday. I'm trying to overcome my own defects because they're significant. Your defects only affect me when you and I interact, but my defects, I carry them around everywhere. I'm afflicted by them. This is the real problem I need to be wrestling with. And I always took that as a kind of basic, foundational wisdom. I love it when I encounter it in other traditions. But anyway, yeah. So, the genocide versus religious genocide, versus, geographical genocide. There's a lot of nuances here. I'm not going to try to cut too fine a point on, but it's when I say Judaism doesn't have it inherently built into it the concept of religious genocide, what I mean is Judaism doesn't mandate that its followers build the world's greatest army and spread across the earth and exterminate all other religions until there's not a single person on earth who isn't Jewish. That's religious genocide. And specifically, that is the religious genocide that the medieval worldview of medieval European Christianity believed. Not the mystics and the peacemakers and the nuns and the spiritualists. I'm talking about the power structure. The core belief system of the power structure is there's one right set of answers, we have it, and the world will never know peace until we eliminate all other religions. And they set about to do it. And they did it as best they could. And the way that we know that this is a powerful, potent force in the idea system of Europe, even after the Middle Ages, is that even Hegel says it. Oh God, Hegel. It's one of his worst moments. He talks about the Greeks having explored the idea of freedom for the first time in the world, which of course can't possibly be true, but he didn't know any better. But then he says, but they only understood half freedom because they didn't know Jesus. And only with Jesus will the world ever experience freedom, which is his little recapitulation, whether he realizes it or not, of the medieval recipe that says, oh, if only we could eliminate all other religions, then we could all be free in a great brotherhood of man. It's that genocidal recipe. Jews don't think that way. It's a different kind of, if there's genocide going on in Israel, it's a different kind of genocide. Then there should be no other religions anywhere. The medieval worldview is proudly religiously genocidal. It wants to be a universe. That's why it says Catholic wants to be a universal religion, a Catholic religion, the religion for everyone. This has nothing to do with today's religions. Right, the Catholic Church after the Reformation and Counter-Reformation and today is a much more ecumenical and even interfaith organization. We're talking about 500 to 1500. Sharon, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
So, excuse me, this whole paragraph is pretty rich, and this is one of the areas where when I have doubt about religion, about my faith, the sentence I look at, it says, he stands as an absolute judge, incorruptible and unapproachable. He is radically more mysterious, more remote in principle from the world of persons and psyches. And I take it that's the God of the Old Testament. And another book I read many years ago is called The Genesis of Justice by Alan Dershowitz. God bless him. But one of the things that he contended was that, and the paragraph mentions it here, God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son, and then he saved him. And he said, Abraham asked God asked Abraham to be obedient, and Abraham did pass the test of obedience. But did he pass the test of moral self-determination? Because he was ready to kill his son. And is this the way that you express faith? And all of these are questions, and I don't know if there are any answers to it. But it's mentioned here, so I thought I would just add my question in perspective to it. Because the God of the New Testament is a slightly different character.
Yes, and I'm so glad you brought it up, because this was what I had prepared to talk about these sentences is this very issue of Abraham's sacrifice. And I want to start, I Joe and Ari are waiting in line, and I don't want to have Ari. He's a very patient man, but I don't want to test his patience by doing a terrible job of explicating what I'm about to explicate when he was just about to give us a correction. So I'm going to start by saying that there's a difference between the Torah and the Old Testament, and even were the text identical, there's a difference between the Torah and the Old Testament. And the difference is who's reading it and how are they reading it? How does their theology work? What do they think the relationship between God and man is? And that changes how you read that text. I know that Jewish people read the story of Abraham wildly differently than medieval Christians read the story of Abraham. And medieval Christians read the story of Abraham partly as see how kind God is, that he would ask for this but wouldn't do it. See, because he's a good God. A bad God would actually, take the sacrifice. But he's a good God, so he doesn't take the sacrifice. And they try not to talk too much about what kind of God asks you to do that in the first place? Because the Greeks had opinions about that, which I'm going to talk about. But the other thing that was really appealing to the power structure of medieval Europe is shut up and do what I say. That's what they wanted the populace to do. Shut up and do what I say. They wanted the kings and the barons and the dukes and all of the power structure, the political non-theocratic power structure of Europe. They wanted them to shut up and do what the church said. Those who pray are supposed to rule those who fight, who are supposed to rule those who labor. That's the class structure that's being proposed as the ideal model for Europe. And it requires absolute obedience. The premise likewise that says, if only we can get people to do what the perfect God tells us to do, then we ourselves can behave in a perfect way. We will finally stop murdering each other if we just shut up and do what we're told. Obedience, absolute obedience, is the spine of this promise. Because without absolute obedience, then you're back to where you have God telling you to do the right thing, but nobody's doing it. And that's what, Augustine and others hate. They're like, we live in a corruptible world. You can't trust people. I mean, the Romans approved that. You can't trust human beings to do the right thing. We need to get people to stop relying on their own judgment and start doing what God's telling them. And if we do that, we'll have peace on earth and brotherhood towards men. But if we don't do that, we're going to have a problem. So shut up and obey. So when a medieval Christian reads the story of Abraham, they not only see God as good, but they see how things work out if you will just shut up and obey. So shut up and obey. Do what God tells you. He won't actually let you do anything evil. You don't need any moral judgment of your own because his is better than yours anyway. And even if it sounds like he's asking you to do something evil, he's God and he's all good. So in the end, it will work out. The knife will be spared. Your son will live. Right? So that lesson is a medieval lesson. That's not a Jewish lesson. I'm sure Ari's going to tell us. the Jewish lesson is different. And certainly Kenneth is arguing that the Jewish lesson is different. And Ari can add nuance. But let me contrast that with the story of Agamemnon. Agamemnon and Iphigenia. Agamemnon, remember that Agamemnon is the high king of the Greek tribes. The Greek tribes have all been fighting amongst each other. They've managed to get them to stop fighting over Helen, who's married to Agamemnon's brother Menelaus. She's the most desirable woman in the world. In fact, she's fatally desirable. She's got divine blood in her veins. So she's so desirable that she's touched by Aphrodite and she's corrupting everything. Everybody wants to fight over her. And Odysseus comes up with the trick, the solution to get them to stop fighting, which is they take the blood oath. On the river Styx, they take the blood oath that says, we will not steal Helen from whoever she marries. And if anybody does try to steal Helen, we will all unite and destroy that king. And since every king knows it would be him against all of Greece, nobody will do this terrible thing. And so they have bound together the domestic farce of Menelaus and Helen to the politics, the realm of politics outside the oikos. They've committed a blasphemy from the Greek perspective. They've tied politics to bedroom politics. And they have tied the gods to bedroom politics by swearing the oath on the gods in the river Styx. All of heaven and earth has been tied to the fidelity of this couple, which is a terrible thing. And Eris screws it all up by rolling the golden apple in front of the goddesses and inventing envy and getting Paris to make his stupid judgment that Aphrodite is the best. And now the other goddesses are pissed off. And now Paris gets the gift of breaking up the marriage of Menelaus and Helen and leads the entire Bronze Age into catastrophe. That's the backdrop, right? So what's the moment? Everything that's happening is blasphemy and sin and catastrophe. This is like apocalypse for the Bronze Age, that all the world is being drawn into this thing. And the gods are not having it. They're bound by oaths, which is forcing them into this mess, but they don't want it. And Artemis, the goddess of nature and excellence, and Sophrosyne, who knows what is healthy for people and not healthy for people, tries to head it off at the pass by denying the winds to Agamemnon's fleet. And when Agamemnon persists by using supernatural, or let's say super hypernatural forces of a prophet to find out how to make the winds stop, she delivers a prophecy that ought to stop him in his tracks. You'd have to sacrifice your daughter. Now, human sacrifice has been banned in ancient Greece for generations. It is universally reviled as an evil. Thou shalt not sacrifice thy children, not even to the gods, because the gods are not above nature, and it is unnatural to sacrifice your children. The Olympian gods are bound by nature. They are within the laws in the realm of nature. They cannot ask you to do, they cannot demand that you do what is fundamentally unhealthy and unnatural. Otherwise, they wouldn't be gods in the ancient Greek perspective. So the fact that Artemis is demanding this is like when the oracle at Delphi tells the emperor of Persia that if you attack the Greeks, a great empire shall fall. He's not promising the Greeks will fall. He's saying you're going to be hoist on your own petard. That's what the oracle is telling the emperor of Persia, and he doesn't understand it. And Agamemnon is too much of an egotist to understand it. He's obsessed with being the king of kings. Nothing could be better or more important than his own importance. And we know that because he spends the entire Iliad fighting with Achilles, and every time he does, the Greeks start losing because Achilles gets pissed off and won't fight for Agamemnon. Agamemnon cannot stop humping the leg of everybody around him, trying to establish dominance. So when Artemis gives him this prophecy, the sane thing to do is say, let's all go home. Let's all go home. If the only way to proceed is to violate the laws of nature, that means that what we're doing is unnatural and unhealthy, and it's going to destroy us all. So let's not do it. Let's go home. I know it's going to hurt me personally. I will lose face before the Greeks. But that is far better than doing what is horrible and hateful and destructive of life. That's what any sane person would do. This is what the Greeks are trying to say. But instead, Agamemnon says, well, if that's the price, I'll pay it. And moderns all go, yeah, that's right. If you want to buy something, you pay the price. That's how things work. Agamemnon wanted to go and defeat Troy, so he paid the price. I mean, sure, it's unfortunate, but, paying prices, that's what we do. We get it. We get Agamemnon's reasoning in exactly the way that proves that we're sick, in the same way that Agamemnon was sick. Right? Now, medieval Christians reading the story of Agamemnon, or post-medieval people who have been raised in a Christian context, interpret the story of Agamemnon as being the story of Abraham. We misunderstand what the Greeks are saying because we're not ancient Greeks. We don't have their value system. We don't know what Sophrosyne is, let alone how important it is. And we don't know who Artemis is, and that she would never, ever, ever demand something in violation of Sophrosyne. We don't get it. So to us, this just looks like, okay, the goddess, just like the God of Abraham, is demanding a sacrifice. And then we say, oh, but she actually did it. She actually took Iphigenia. Well, this is the proof that Artemis is a worse deity than God. Because, God didn't actually take Abraham because he's better than that. So this must prove that the Greek gods are bad. They're just demons, just like the medieval said. And once again, we're failing to understand because, of course, Artemis spirits Iphigenia away because she's better off not being raised by that asshole Agamemnon. And she goes to become a priestess of Artemis in Taurus, as we know from other stories later on. Right? This is an example of escaping from domestic abuse, being aided and abetted by a goddess of health and vitality who takes a special interest in childbirth and children. All of this is lost on us. Whether we're moderns or whether we're medievals, we can't see the Greek story because our worldview has predisposed us to an interpretive framework that doesn't make it possible to see what the Greeks, what was obvious, not just what was present for the Greeks with effort, but what was painfully obvious to the Greeks. It's like Donald says about Plato's dialogues. You know, we read them and it's like, okay, here's some characters having an argument, and this guy's talking about courage. And Donald says, no, that's the general who fled the battle of such and such. Every Greek knew that asshole was a coward. And he's deigning to lecture about the nature of courage. Every Greek is laughing his ass off. Right? It's like you hardly even know what to compare it to. These are stock characters that everybody knows, and everybody knows what it means when those words come out of that person's mouth. And we're missing the context. So we don't know what it means when Artemis says, yeah, sacrifice your daughter. It means go home, idiot. You're going to wreck everything. Go home. He's like, no, I don't care what happens. I'm a winner, and winners win. And this is why Aeschylus later has his wife stab him. You know, he's murdered when he comes home because he's committed an unforgivable sin. He has to die. He has to die. He's the worst. And he had every clue that he should stop, and he still didn't do it. He's a far worse person than Oedipus. Right? I mean, Oedipus, you know, had his flaws, but he didn't understand his situation. Agamemnon had giant neon signs pointing, go home, stupid. And he still didn't do it. All right, Joe, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll be brief because I think that, you know, no, I mean, it's interesting to just look at different perspectives because I think one of the overarching themes you're seeing is nature. Just as we were talking about before with the idea of the instrumentalists and how they actually thought they were right, and they were actually fooled into thinking that they were right, in a sense that, you know, that there's this, you know, they were writing their own narrative. They were creating their own narratives. And it's not totally dissimilar to what we're seeing here with the militarization, if you will, or even, yeah, I mean, that's essentially what it is, of belief. And in the sense that you absolutely are, you know, needing to just believe this one story, and that this one story is exactly the narrative that is leading to the promised land. And what happens in that process, unfortunately, is that there is this some like kind of discipline or truth to it, and it fools everybody. And but it's actually it's working against itself without even knowing it. Not totally dissimilar to what we were talking about. So the whole point is this idea of nature and natural selection. It's the same problem that's kind of underpinning both of these basically both of these problems that we discussed a little bit earlier. And I think that that's, you know, it's not only obedience, it's blind obedience. And so I think that that's where even if you're talking about any kind of blind obedience that doesn't require any kind of nuance or you know, some of the same principles that the Greeks knew so well in many cases, that if you adhere, like if you can abandon those, if you abandon virtue ethics for, you know, kind of whatever your religion is going to be, so to speak, that is actually incapable of you know, kind of any kind of adaptability, I would say, is maybe one way of saying it. I don't know, admit that's maybe not the best word, but nonetheless, I think that, you know, what I'm trying to say is that you can see the parallels here about how there's a little bit of truth that fools us into thinking that we're right, and then you have power structures that pervert what people do, and it can end up horribly wrong, whether it's the, you know, instrumentalists that, believe that they understand the way nature works, and they're endowed by God.
Yeah.
And then here's, in this case, they're actually really saying God's saying it, right?
Yes.
So it's like, this is God. So, anyway, it's, I think the real danger is hubris.
Yeah. There's interesting stuff here from Hannah Arendt when her critique of the Holocaust and why did all those Germans follow those evil orders was they thought they had a duty to obey. They thought that being told to obey and being trained to obey meant they had a right to obey. And she says in a famous interview, no man has the right to obey. In that sense, we don't have that right. We have to, if we follow orders, it has to be in an aware, responsible way. So if I do what my sensei says, I do it because my sensei's been doing this for 60 years and he knows it better than I do. But I don't do it blindly. I still bring in my understanding of the situation, and there'll be times where I'll pause and question. And there's a class that's taught in the US military, and it's stressed repeatedly in the Coast Guard and somewhat less often in some of the other disciplines, where you're supposed to learn what an illegal order is. And they train you. If you obey an illegal order, you're a criminal. You have no right to obey an illegal order. You have a duty to evaluate orders to figure out if they're right or not. And if you don't do that, you're a criminal.
But how can you exhibit moral self-determination in a group? The military, the Nazis? How can you exhibit independence in that?
This is the challenge for Homo sapiens, the complex relationship between the group and the individual. How can you form a group and yet also remain an individual at the same time? And the Greeks are obsessed with this problem. That's why for them, health and vitality has to be operating at all these levels at the same time. They're trying to force us not to fixate on one level, whether it's the individual or the group, and to believe that that's the one true right level and the other levels are somehow not real or not important. They're like, no, they're all important. You can think of it as, as polytheism is to multiple divinities, they're trying to do the same thing about health at multiple scales of organization. The health of your liver and your heart and your spleen is as important as your overall health, because you don't get to have overall health without the health of your organs. And also, your organs don't get to have health without the health of the organism. If you die, they die. They don't get to go on. So, this is hilarious.
I'll let everybody go, but I just think it's interesting with the Abraham and Kierkegaard aspect of it. Maybe we could talk about that next time.
Yeah, that was
Fear
a good point.
trembling.
Clearly, we're gonna have to come back to this because it's chewy. But let's see how many more people we can get in. Ari, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Sure, yeah, I'm going to try and do my best to say what the general rabbinic literature of like the Talmud say about this, all the way through, and then what modern, specifically Jonathan Sacks says about this, which is in some cases a bit of a heretic, but I don't think he's so much of a heretic as he just seems to be with the authority figures trying to really just keep essentially Jews in line doing what they're supposed to do. Most of them say something very similar to what Kenneth is saying in the combination, that God, you never be prepared. You never know what God is going to ask from you. And you always need to be able to listen. And if you listen properly, it will all work out for the best, because he's always going to have, a long-term good at maybe a short-term or even a medium-term huge sacrifice. So this is like this is a classic theodicy for like the Holocaust, right? How you can have evil. Well, the evil led to the birth of the state of Israel. So I don't really buy into that so much. But what I do buy into is the strange thing that Judaism has tons of times of the word to command. God commands humans all over the place, but there's never a word for humans to actually obey. There's no word for obey in Hebrew. There isn't. So what it is, there's a word to listen. And essentially, the interesting thing about Abraham, if you look at the rest of his life, anytime God gives him something to do, Abraham asks, will the God of justice do justice? He usually pushes back. He usually gets an argument with God. This is something the Greeks don't do. He immediately gets in an argument, and he argues all the time with God. Yet on this one thing with his son, he doesn't argue. And to me, it seems like, and this is where Rabbi Sachs would say, that this is clearly why he wasn't just didn't, the nation of Israel didn't come from him. It had to go on to defer to his son. This was a point of mistake. He should have engaged in the dialectic that he'd been doing for the rest of his whole life. His last test, he has 10 tests supposedly. This is the 10th test, the biggest and the hardest one. And to some degree, I think he kind of fails. As Sharon would say, it's not that he doesn't engage in what's morally right. That's kind of a loaded question. I think the better way of looking, he doesn't engage in the dialectic at all, which is maybe the moral duty, right? He has to be like, God, what's going on here? He should be like, is this justice? He would do this when Lot was in Sodom and Gomorrah was all like their thing, right? He does this all the time for all these other people. And it just actually makes sense for a certain type of person. I know people that are really, really nice to every stranger on the street, and then they're not so nice to their wives and their kids. So I almost feel like, is this what's going on here? Because also a big thing that most people don't notice is once Abraham goes and does this, Sarah dies. She dies because she dies essentially because she thinks Isaac's dead, right? So this is seems from a biblical point of view a clear criticism of Abraham's behavior. But then you say what the Torah says as reframing this is like, no, Abraham just did his listening. And he did what he did, and therefore it all works out for the good. So therefore, for your own simple pedestrian life where you don't understand things, just listen to God, and it'll all work out for the best. And try to ask God what He really wants from you. And you're supposed to. The idea is, yes, He commands you things, but you're supposed to interpret them within a framework, and you're supposed to have some sort of dialectic. But at the same time, just do what you're told. So I really don't like that. What I like, what Rabbi Sachs says, is essentially that Abraham kind of fails in this, and you see this because right afterwards, Yitzchak is like written out of the Torah. He is, or the Bible. He's not mentioned barely at all. He's just gone. And this is like a traumatized kid. And then you look at the problems that happened between Esau and Jacob. I don't remember Esau's whatever in Hebrew, Esau and Yaakov. Their sibling rivalry is because Yitzchak loves Esau unconditionally. He says he loves him like crazy. Well, this is because he was probably sacrificed. He's explicitly like, I was sacrificed. And my father also had to send away Ishmael because Sarah told him to. None of this stuff. I'm going to love my sons unconditionally, and I'm going to fix the problem that my father made, which created a big problem of civil rivalry because what he was loved one and not the other. And then you have the whole problems. And then the big thing that's different that you see that's at least argued by people like Jordan Peterson in the Christian world, but also in the Jewish world, the reason Jacob is so worthy is because he gets his name turned to Israel, which is what we're called now. It's because he wrestles with God in this whole angel thing. He's able to really wrestle with God. So that wrestling seems like a fixing of the problems that his grandfather made, where he wasn't wrestling when he needed to be. Now, I'll be honest, the classic rabbinic commentators do not talk about this. I think they know it, but they're like, yeah, I want to keep the Jews from going off and being too radical. All these, Israel's being destroyed and we're in diaspora and we're in exile. We just need people to listen to the rabbi and follow his authority. So there's some sort of like confirmation bias. I deeply think of the rabbinic authority that like, you need to do our way or the highway because, we're the highway and we want the highway to be us, right? So there is a bit of that, which is me being heretical. But in the modern sense, I'm on camera going to be being heretical in this, but that's okay. In the sense of like Jonathan Sachs says, that there's the Torah, the beautiful thing about the biblical stories, I guess similarly to the Greek stories, is our heroes are the greatest possible people are riddled with flaws. And we're supposed to learn from these flaws. And we're also supposed to see this progress of, well, Abraham messed up. Isaac messed up less. And then Jacob messed up less. And then you got Moses, Aaron, and Miriam being the trifecta of like what leadership is supposed to be. Starting with like Cain and Abel killing each other, down to Aaron and Moses being like the ultimate cooperative team, right? So it's supposed to be, Genesis is supposed to be like how you really don't do things, and you do things a little bit better every time. But it's heretical to say that maybe Abraham really kind of messed up. I really think he did. But there is another point to say that lastly, I'll try to keep it really short. The Rabbi Sachs says explicitly and many times that I think is brilliant that no one else says, is he puts this in the context of what's going on in the rest of the world, and he specifically calls out the Romans that are the embodiment of this later, called patrio potestas, that parents are ultimately able to own their children, and that they can judge them and do whatever they want. And if a parent kills their child, they're not liable to any justice or death penalty or anything like this. It's not the same thing as sacrificing to the gods. You're not supposed to do that. But somewhere like Sparta, they throw the weak children down the well or something. The idea here is God is trying to show Abraham that you do not own your son. In fact, you do not own yourself either. I own all of you. I own life, and you are merely the possessor, right? You possess your body and you possess your soul, but you do not own them. I own them. And this is when you all get this whole theory of redemption is actually a redemption of the firstborn. And this redeeming thing, it's about God owns life. Whether or not I buy into this model, it's a very nice, succinct way of interpreting this. It's trying to show Abraham real fast that I'm going to give you kids. They do not belong to you. They belong to me. You are their guardian, you are their protector, you are their keeper, but they are not yours to do what you wish. They belong to me.
There's something brilliant in that, right? I mean, relationships between parents and children would be healthier if in general we acknowledged that they're not our little toys to break as we see fit.
So yeah, in his teaching for how to live in the modern world, one of the big things he complains about, he says the best thing you can do for your kids is give them the space to be the people they're going to become. You don't own them. Don't make them little versions of you. Don't try to control their every doing. Don't be the helicopter. All of these things are modern versions of this problem. And the best thing you learn from this is let go. You're not in control. Yeah, you're supposed to guide them and show them and give them the environment like a plant with its space to water it and grow it. But then once it grows, maybe you trim things here and there, but you don't just, it's not your plant. It's its own being.
Yeah. Thank you, Ari. That was very helpful. Just what I was hoping for. I was hoping for. Bye, Geneva. So I guess we'll give the final word to Stephen to wrap us up for today.
Oh, so just going to say, this is a question that's coming up in me. The rationalists, atheists, tell us that the Christian religion and perhaps all religion is declining due to the effect of the Enlightenment and the growth of reason. So reason has defeated the spirituality of Christianity, according to the rationalists. Is this true? You don't think so?
I mean, it depends on how you define all these terms. It's like Kierkegaard and Nietzsche have opinions about this, right? Can you call yourself a Christian and still not be a Christian? Can you, would Jesus recognize you as a Christian? Would Joan of Arc recognize you as a Christian? So, Nietzsche's criticism, and Kierkegaard has the same one, expressed slightly differently, is that he's surrounded by people who call themselves Christians, but they don't behave like Christians. So are they or aren't they? How do you define these words? And much of what they're criticizing in these people is what is your criticism of them. It is that they're contaminated by rationalism. They're too busy trying to get along in a bourgeois world in the marketplace. Don't rock the boat. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. Don't upset anybody. And meanwhile, here's Jesus saying, "Oh, overturn the tables in the temple."
Okay, Nietzsche and Kierkegaard aren't quite the rationalist in the modern sense.
So they're critiquing it.
Yeah, but the point is, those who do think that they're the rationalists,
yes,
who worship reason as a god,
yes,
are telling us that their god, reason, has displaced the spiritual god of Christianity or any other. That's the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is the overthrow of religion.
Yes.
And it's purely because of reason.
Yes, this is the modernist argument and the rationalist argument. You're absolutely right. And we will come after that one with both barrels when we get into the section on modernity. But
I better write this one down. Make sure you all do your homework.
Yeah, damn straight. Well, it's not like we can forget, because Kierkegaard and Nietzsche won't shut up about it. We get to the modern era, and we're going to talk a lot about that very question, for sure. But starting next week, I've got a list of saints and mystics and visionaries that we'll start introducing, some Jewish, some Muslim, some Christian, And we'll start introducing them as counterpoint to make sure that we're getting a balanced picture of the medieval epoch. Because it's not all about religious genocide, right? I mean, the Brotherhood of Man stuff, which is just branding for the power structure, is taken very seriously by these mystics and visionaries. That's why they keep setting up monastic orders and nunneries and the like. They're trying to live on Earth in a way according to, you know, what they interpret to be the spirit of the Christian ethos. And that's going to be important to getting the whole picture. So, with that, I guess we wrap up for this week. Hope you had a good time.
Thank you, Rick, for enlightening.
Thank you so much, Rick.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Ari. I
Thanks,
keep
Ari.
talking to my children about the Roman model where I own them, and they don't
That's
buy
right.
it either.
Patrio protestus. Show those turds who's boss.
You know, as with everything, it's a spectrum. It's a balance.
Yes.
Yeah.
There I go again. Yeah, that's it's a balance.
Yeah. Yeah. And a dialectic of that balance, right? That's
Yep.
exactly.
That's right. But the God that we're talking about here is incorruptible and unapproachable, absolute judge. That's the God of Abraham. That's the way I see it. You know. Okay. See you guys.
All right, bye-bye, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Great week.